Chapter 220. Metamorph Magus Edoras, the royal city of Rohan, sat on a lonely green hill at the mouth of the broad Edoras Valley, beneath the White Mountains. The snow-born river ran to the east of the town. Ditches, ramparts, and spiked fences circled the hill, and a black gate guarded the only entrance. At the summit stood Meduseld, the golden hall of the Rohirrim. With a soft pop, Dewey appeared in a quiet courtyard just outside the city. He had come from Isengard by apparition, many small jumps along the way, landing cleanly at a place he had never actually seen. Apparition usually required a prior visit or an exact mental image of a landmark. Dewey had collected descriptions of Edoras from Elrond, Gandalf, and others until the layout and detail were crystal clear in his mind, and that allowed him to reach it without error. Rohan was a land of rolling pastures and vast grasslands, famed for its horses. The finest breeds of Maeris came from these plains, horses of legendary speed and endurance. Even the steeds Dewey had once used to crossbreed hippogriffs and pegasi, and Gandalf's famed Mount Shadowfax, traced lineage back to the great horses of these fields. The Rohirrim's culture, their banners, and their architecture all celebrated the horse. Dewey, amused by the horse motifs everywhere, sauntered toward the city gate to see the place properly. The gate guards watched the crowd with practiced caution. Dewey's appearance drew eyes. Taller than most, clad in a quietly luxurious black robe, and bearing the easy elegance of an elf with a hint of authority, he stood out even when he tried not to. The captain approached respectfully, wary of offending such a stranger. "Sir, may I ask where you're from?" the captain said. "Outsiders must register before entering the city." Dewey had come only to register. Given his experience, he knew the most reliable place to sign in would be the royal hall itself, Meduseld. He didn't mean to make trouble, so he answered plainly. "I am Dewey, from Isengard, Orthanc in the west. I'm traveling and wish to visit King Thengel." At the name Isengard, the captain's manner changed. News of a new lord there had already reached Rohan, the man who had pacified the wild Dunlendings and signed a treaty on the western border. Stories of his deeds and even rumors of a dragon had traveled fast. The captain became even more respectful. "Please wait, sir. I will report this at once." He hurried off to tell his superiors. Inside Meduseld, King Thengel was speaking with his chief advisor, Mario, a grizzled veteran who had once commanded the fords of Isen and had made his name defending the western border. When the servant announced a visitor from Isengard, Thengel's eyes lit up and he ordered that Dewey be invited in. Mario's face, however, tightened. Mario had long distrusted the Dunlendings. He had opposed Thengel's peace treaty with them and resented anyone who sheltered them. A newcomer from Isengard, especially one rumored to have tamed the Dunlendings, earned his instinctive suspicion. Still, Thengel welcomed Dewey down from the throne himself. "Wizard Dewey," Thengel said, stepping forward with warm, friendly authority, "it's been more than a year since we last met. It's an honor to have you visit Edoras." Thengel treated Dewey as an equal rather than a subject. Since Dewey had seized Orthanc, the king had quietly gathered reports of him, eager to win favor with this powerful new neighbor. Dewey inclined his head. "Long time, your majesty. Your hall remains as splendid as ever," Thengel introduced Mario. "This is my chief advisor, Mario." Mario smiled, but it was a practiced, brittle thing. "I've heard much of you, Wizard Dewey. Coincidentally, I once guarded the fords of Isen close to Isengard, though I never saw the tower. I regret that now." His tone shifted a touch, feigning genial curiosity. "What brings you to Edoras? If there is anything you need, speak freely." Thengel echoed the invitation, while Dewey's eyes lingered on Mario. He perceived the man's hostility, thinly masked and coiled, and, trained now to hold his mental focus since awakening his legitimacy, he resisted reaching into Mario's mind immediately. He had learned to restrain his mental power lest stray thoughts overwhelm him. For the moment, Dewey let the tension go and smiled. "No important business, your majesty. I heard of the beauty of the Rohan grasslands and wished to see them. And you extended an invitation. I came to accept." Thengel did not press the truth. He ordered a banquet in Dewey's honor. Dewey accepted. A system notification chimed quietly in his head. "Hogwarts Sign-in System, locating Kingdom of Rohan Edoras. Do you wish to sign in?" "Sign in," Dewey replied. "Sign in successful. Congratulations, you have obtained the shapeshifting magus talent." Dewey was surprised and pleased. Shapeshifting Magus was different from an animagus. An animagus learned to become one specific animal through high transfiguration. A shapeshifting magus had an innate ability to alter appearance at will, without potions like polyjuice, without time limits, and without transformations being easily undone by other magic. Nymphadora Tonks in the wizarding world was an example. She changed her looks on a whim, even her hair color changing with her mood. The gift was rare and immensely useful for disguise. Dewey felt a new malleability in his body, a readiness to be reshaped by thought. The Rohirrim banquet that followed was hearty and loud, meat, mead, and robust song. Mario played the dutiful host but also probed, raising toasts and asking pointed questions. Dewey saw the attempt to get him drunk, but he did not refuse the cups. His constitution, already close to elven, made him impervious to ordinary drink. He sipped and smiled. The wine had little effect. Mario, on the other hand, grew red-faced as the cups took their toll. By the time his own intoxication could not be hidden, he swayed. You don't get drunk?" Mario blurted incredulously. Dewey shook his head gently and offered a dry, humorous line. "Of course not. I feel a little tingle in my fingertips. Must be the drink." Mario flushed deeper, with a mix of anger and embarrassment, and then collapsed in a drunken heap. At once the hall erupted into laughter and cheers. Thengel laughed, clapping Dewey on the shoulder. "Mario has always had the strongest constitution among us. No one has bested him until tonight. A rare sight indeed." Dewey deflected the praise modestly. "Lord Mario is being modest. If I'd drunk more, I might have passed out myself." While the hall celebrated, Dewey's gaze fell on the fallen advisor. With Mario unconscious and his mental defenses down, Dewey permitted his legitimacy a brief, careful probe. He skimmed the man's memories, enough to confirm the hostility he'd sensed. His expression cooled. The information brought a pinch of amusement rather than action. He allowed servants to carry Mario away and waited for the banquet to wind down before retiring to his guest chamber. Alone, Dewey conjured a large mirror with a flick of his hand and stood before it. He watched as his black hair lengthened and turned gold. His dark eyes shifted to deep blue, his skin and features softened, and his ears tapered to elegant points. The man who looked back from the glass was, unmistakably, an elf. Chapter 221. East Duir stared at his reflection and felt a private thrill. The shape-shifting magus talent made his body feel like clay, malleable, endlessly adjustable to his will. In his current form, he could easily pass through Rivendell or Lothlorien without most elves recognizing him. That said, his mastery was still shallow. For now he could alter hair, skin tone, and general facial features, but not his voice or height. At higher skill, he would be able to change age, sex, even stature. True, magical disguise that could not be forcibly undone. In short, a shape-shifting magus was the arcane equivalent of mystique. One day he might become an old man, a child, or a woman so completely that no spell could reveal his original face. He practiced until late into the night, testing other appearances, stopping only when sleep finally stole him. Early the next morning, he formally bade King Thengel farewell. Thengel tried to persuade him to stay, but Duir's resolve held. Before leaving, he said something brief that made the king frown, then departed the palace with a half-smile. King Thengel watched him go, displeasure darkening his features. He dismissed his guards and summoned his chief advisor, Mario. Mario, still groggy from a night of drunkenness, came when summoned, confused but respectful. "You sent for me, your majesty," he asked. Thengel's stare was cold and measured, and Mario shifted under it. After a long silence, the king spoke. "Mario, I have treated you well. Why would you betray me? Why collude with Saruman and incite hatred between the people of Rohan and the Dunlendings?" Mario's face went pale. "Your majesty, I am loyal. Someone is lying to you. Some villain is whispering into your ear. I would never conspire with Saruman." Thengel did not soften. "These are Wizard Duir's words. Do you think he lies?" Panic flickered across Mario's features. He tried to deflect. "He's slandering me. Those Dunlendings swore allegiance to him long before me. I killed many Dunlendings who harassed the border. He seeks revenge." Thengel's expression sharpened. "He also says you accepted orders from Saruman to poison me and seize Rohan." Mario's pupils constricted. He stammered denials. "No, your majesty, believe me, I have never dealt with Saruman. This wizard wants to sow discord and seize Rohan for himself." Thengel waved him down with an authority that brooked no reply. We will see. Soldiers who had been sent to search Mario's quarters returned with evidence, letters and a small vial of green liquid. Thengel spread the correspondence, letters between Mario and Saruman, across the table. The hall fell into a deadly silence, broken only by the rustle of paper. Mario, staring at the evidence, went white and sank to his knees. "You have nothing to say?" Thengel asked. Mario knew it was over. He begged, pleaded, groveled, until Thengel, unmoved, ordered a soldier to bring him the green vial. "Drink." Duir did not witness this scene himself, but he had already guessed the outcome. He had not expected Saruman's plans to be so thorough, instigating hatred between Dunlendings and Rohirrim and planting agents within Rohan itself. Mario had been Saruman's highest-ranking ally inside the kingdom, stirring border conflicts, fostering resentment, and, after Saruman's fall, continuing to work in secret to control King Thengel and seize power. Neither Saruman nor Mario had anticipated Duir's arrival in Edoras, nor that Duir possessed legitimacy. By reading Mario's memories, Duir had learned the truth and exposed their conspiracy. Duir imagined Saruman's fury, but he did not dwell on it. He left Edoras and, before setting out, changed his appearance into that of an ordinary-looking Easterling. He dressed in plain robes. Except for his height and voice, he was now unrecognizable, even to those who knew him well. The eastern border of Rohan runs along the Anduin. Beyond it rise the Emyn Muil, and to their east lies Mordor, the dark heart of Sauron, a place crawling with nightmarish creatures and watched by the ever-seeing eye. Even powerful beings like Gandalf or Galadriel would not enter Mordor lightly. Duir had no intention of stumbling into Sauron's jaws. After crossing the Anduin, he turned north, skirting Mordor's borders and taking the long way through Rovanion. Despite short-distance apparitions and his flying broomstick, the journey took more than a month. He moved cautiously. Though the Sea of Rhûn and the lands beyond were not directly ruled by Sauron anymore, his influence was deep. In Sauron's height, many Easterling tribes had been corrupted or enslaved. Some still worshipped him like a god. Duir cloaked himself further with a disillusionment charm and slipped among the tribes, learning to read their manners, speech, and superstitions. The Easterlings he met were unfamiliar, sallow or olive-skinned, high-cheekboned and rugged, largely nomadic and brutal in manner. They had no memory of Hildorian, the ancient birthplace of men. Under Sauron's shadow, they attributed their origins to darker sources. Nor did ordinary tribesmen know of the Blue Wizard. Only by finding the higher-ranking chiefs and probing their minds with legitimacy did Duir learn anything concrete. Reports of figures in blue robes organizing resistance in Dorwinion by the mouth of the running river near the Sea of Rhûn. With this lead, Duir wasted no time. He had tried to check into the system during his travels, but the tribes he passed through weren't registering. Perhaps they didn't meet some criterion. Then again, he thought, if every place could be checked in, he'd have exhausted the rewards long ago. Perhaps it was fitting that the Far East waited until now. The Sea of Rhûn is the largest inland sea in Middle-earth, fed by the running river from Esgaroth and the Redwater from the Iron Hills. Dorwinion sits northwest of the sea at the river's mouth, a warm, fertile plain famous for its wines so strong they could send even an elf into sleep. King Thranduil of the Woodland Realm was said to favor Dorwinion vintages. Much of the wine traveled down the running river to Esgaroth, where it was barreled and floated by raft toward the Woodland Realm. The master of Esgaroth had amassed wealth by controlling that trade. From his broomstick, Duir drifted over Dorwinion and looked down on vast, ordered vineyards and people tending the vines. The sight of such peace and prosperity so far east, amid lands touched by Sauron's influence, surprised him. For a moment, the bustle and violence of his journey fell away, replaced by the simple, sunlit rows of grapevines below. Chapter 222, Occlumency. Duir's surprise deepened when he discovered that Dorwinion was home not only to humans, but to elves as well. In the west, the elves, those of Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the Woodland Realm, kept to themselves, courteous, distant, and sparing in their dealings with men. Dorwinion, far to the east, was different. Here, elves and humans lived intermixed, working the same vineyards while each people kept distinct neighborhoods. From above, Duir watched both races tending the vines. The elven quarter was dominated by ancient, sprawling grapevines, trunks as thick as coiled dragons, roots that gripped the soil for ages, and vines flung like living bridges across thousands of square meters. On those vines hung small, exquisite houses woven from living tendrils, bird nest dwellings connected to the ground by rope-like ladder vines. Some elves, though, preferred ground-level homes or caverns in root systems. But Duir's attention was drawn to one vine that dwarfed the rest. It rose on a low hill, its trunk gnarled and scarred like dragon hide, spreading a green canopy that covered the slope. At its base, on emerald grassland, stood an elven manor. No sooner had Duir approached than the manor lord sensed him. Elven sentries raised weapons and arrows aimed skyward. Detected, Duir ceased hiding. He lifted his hand, removed the disillusionment charm, pressed his broom down, and descended slowly. The manor lord peered up, wary. "Who goes there?" Duir landed and gave the traditional elven greeting, then spoke in fluent Sindarin. "Friends of Dorwinion, do not be alarmed. I am Duir, a wizard from the west, come in friendship." "A wizard from the west?" The lord's posture softened a fraction at Duir's flawless language and manners, though suspicion held. "From where in the west?" "From Eriador, beyond the misty mountains," Duir answered. "I am a friend to the elves of Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the Woodland Realm." The name of those realms made the manor lord's surprise deepen. He had heard of them even so far east, and he knew the Woodland Realm traded wine with Dorwinion. Duir's manner convinced him. Relaxing most of his guards, he welcomed Duir as an honored guest. They ate beneath the open rafters of the manor's banquet hall. Elven attendants poured wine that smelled of sun and time. Dorwinion's vintages were famed and potent. One small sip was enough to make most mortals lose their balance, strong enough to intoxicate even an elf, and Duir tasted it with care. Beside the wine, the table was a bright chaos of grape dishes and tropical fruits. Dorwinion's warm climate grew far more than grapes. The manor lord introduced himself as Calanmere, a Cinda, and one of the elven lords of Dorwinion. He explained the region's peculiar polity. There was no single elven king or human lord, just a patchwork of settlements where Cinda, Nandor, and Avari elves lived alongside human descendants of the House of Beor and Hador. Each people kept their languages, laws, and lands, interfering little in daily life. In times of war, however, men and elves united, especially against incursions from Easterlings. Economically, their ties were tight. Elves brewed the wine, men transported it by river to Lake Town and onward to the Woodland Realm, Dale, and the kingdom under the mountain. That cooperation had kept Dorwinion luminous and untainted by the shadow spreading through much of the east. Calanmere's curiosity turned to Duir. "You have traveled far. What brings a wizard from Eriador to Dorwinion?" Duir did not hide his purpose. He knew these elves had lived for generations in the east and might know things others did not. "Lord Calanmere, have you heard of Hildorian?" "Hildorian?" Calanmere asked, surprised. "Do you mean the awakening place of men?" Duir nodded. "Do you know where it lies?" Calanmere's face reddened with apology. "I am sorry. I know only that Hildorian lies east of the Sea of Rune, farther east than Quivienin, where the elves awoke, near the Eastern Sea. It is a place even we elves have not trod." Duir had expected few answers and was prepared for disappointment. He pursued another lead. "Then do you know the Blue Wizards, Morinetar and Romestamo?" Calanmere's expression brightened into admiration. "Morinetar and Romestamo? Of course. Much of Dorwinion's peace owes to them." He spoke eagerly. "When the eastern lands were overrun by Wain Riders and other hosts of darkness, when the Easterlings pressed and the shadow grew, the two Blue Wizards traveled the east. They rallied men and elves, organized resistance, and turned back incursions that might otherwise have swallowed this region." Duir leaned forward. "Do you know where they are now? I wish to find them." Calanmere shook his head. "Their comings and goings are secretive. They appear in many places and sometimes disguise their paths. They have been seen in embattled regions, stirring resistance, perhaps even deep in Easterling territory. If you seek them, you might look toward Dongi City, south of the Sea of Rune. There have been uprisings and unrest there. It is quite possible the Blue Wizards have been encouraging resistance." At that moment, Duir's personal system pinged quietly. A neat, mechanical voice he knew well supplied a prompt. "Hogwarts Sign-in System. Dorwinion detected. Sign in?" Delighted, Duir confirmed. The reply came instantly. Sign-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining a clumency. A clumency, the system explained, was a discipline of mental defense. It forged a shield within the mind, capable of turning aside legilimency, and if perfected, resisting even enchantments that would seize and bend a will. Duir's thoughts raced. Sauron's greatest weapon was not only steel or sorcery, but the crushing influence he cast over hearts and minds, the way the ring warped wills and made servants of men. If Duir could master a clumency, perhaps he could stand against Sauron's probing, protect his own mind from corruption, and wild and audacious thought, hold the ring without succumbing. Calamir's invitation to remain made the decision easy. Duir would stay in Dorwinion and learn a clumency before venturing further to hunt for the blue wizards. The work began with the essentials: learn to still the mind. A clumency required a clear, blank focus. No stray thoughts, no clinging emotion, to be strong enough to deflect an intruder. For Duir, this was not foreign territory. Years of meditation had taught him how to push distractions away and find that empty, measured calm. The crown of wisdom he bore quickened his thinking and steadied his reason. Within days, he stood at the threshold of the discipline. Progress accelerated. Using his mental training, Duir built a barrier in his mind, first fragile, then reinforced, so that outside thoughts could not reach him unbidden. He discovered, to his surprise and satisfaction, that learning a clumency made his legilimency far more precise. It was as if he gained a switch in his own head. He could choose when to open himself to another's mind and when to lock the door, rather than being a sieve that soaked up every stray impression. Duir remembered tales of Professor Snape's occlumency, how the man withstood even Lord Voldemort's probing and created false memories to deceive him completely. If Snape could weave an inner fortress, could Duir do more? He began to envision a vast mental citadel, a great inner castle like Hogwarts itself, within which he could hide his soul and his truest memories. There, he thought, he might shelter against slow erosion, the subtle corruptions Sauron spread, the invasive whispers of power, even the ring's patient, poisonous influence. The idea captivated him. If he could construct such a fortress and learn to place layers of illusion and secrecy within it, perhaps he could travel into the East without fear of having his mind turned against him. Perhaps one day, he might handle the One Ring without losing himself. For the first time since he left the West, Duir felt a real hope that his mind could become a weapon of defense, not merely a vulnerability. So he trained on, day and night in the warm Dorwinian sun, quieting thoughts until the world was nothing but a pulse, laying stone upon stone in the mental wall, teaching himself to open a window only when he wished to see. The vines outside the manor rustled, and the elves moved like a calm tide, and within Duir, a fortress slowly took shape, stone by invisible stone, readying him for whatever shadow lay ahead. Chapter 223, Sacrifice. Building a mental barrier was an immensely taxing task. Duir practiced occlumency every day, using his mental power to piece together the defenses of his mind bit by bit until he was exhausted. When he could do no more, he would stop and walk the vineyards with Calanmir, the estate owner. The elves of Dorwinion, after long cohabitation with humans, had taken on many human ways. Among them, the Sindar were the finest vintners, the Nandor the best grape growers. Their vines produced the highest yields and sweetest fruit, and the Avari handled most of the wine trade, dealing often with humans. The vineyards themselves were ancient. Centuries or even millennia-old vines sprawled across thousands of square meters, carefully tended by the Nandor. The grapes were not only sweet and fragrant, but also had remarkable restorative properties, able to rapidly replenish physical strength and carry unusual magical effects. Even sturdy elves could be made intoxicated by the wines. Calamir's own vine was said to be over 10,000 years old, a treasured mother plant from which the surrounding vines were propagated. Every year, Calanmir harvested its fruit and personally brewed the wine, then locked those vintages away in a cellar to age for centuries or longer, to be used as special gifts or reserved for distinguished guests. Duir had the privilege of tasting a bottle kept for 1,000 years. The wine was mellow and sweet, thick with fruit aromas and oddly nourishing to the spirit. He found himself drinking one glass after another until he finally blacked out, sleeping a full day and night. When he woke, there was no hangover, only a strange refreshment and a slight increase in his mental power. The effect surprised him. If his mind could grow like that, he thought with a crooked smile, perhaps he could be a willing drunkard. After nearly a month in Dorwinion, Dewey had managed to fashion a mental fortress, Amon Sul, inside his head. It was a far cry from the grandeur of Hogwarts Castle and more a nascent form than a finished citadel. Its internal structures and functions still needed to be built. Even so, the progress he had made was due to the crown of wisdom and the nourishment of the golden cup. At his previous pace, it would have taken a year or two just to reach this rudimentary stage. Building something on the scale of a true mental castle would require far longer. Even so, once Amon Sul took shape, Dewey felt as if his mind were enclosed in solid stone. Ordinary mental intrusions could no longer break through unless he allowed them to. Anyone attempting legitimacy against him would strike a wall and come away dizzy. He was no longer as helpless before Saruman's voice magic or Sauron's mental corrosion. He might not be invulnerable, but he could hold out for minutes rather than seconds. To his surprise, the mental fortress also sharpened his thoughts. He felt calmer, more focused, with fewer distracting emotions. The small triumph pleased him. Having laid down the initial structure, Dewey decided not to devote all his time to perfecting it. Constructing a full mental Hogwarts would be a lifetime's work. He would have to build it slowly, piece by piece. So he said his farewells to Calanmere and prepared to go to Dongi City to find the Blue Wizard. As a token of gratitude, he gifted Calanmere a spatial pouch enchanted with an undetectable extension charm. Calanmere was delighted, and in return, loaded Dewey with a dozen barrels of the estate's treasured wine, vintages from the ancient mother vine. Dewey accepted eagerly. The wine's ability to nourish mental power made it too useful to refuse. He mounted his flying broom and left Dorwinion, gliding over the Sea of Rune toward the east. East of the sea lay the homeland of the Easterlings, many tribes and petty kingdoms, primitive and warlike, often at each other's throats. There were Sauron's followers among them, devotees of Morgoth elsewhere, and tribes stirred into rebellion by a blue wizard. War was the region's constant companion. To avoid drawing attention, Dewey used his shape-shifting magus talent to assume the appearance of an Easterling and traveled east among the tribes. Everywhere he went, the people displayed statues and symbols of Sauron, cast iron icons, carved stone effigies, wooden idols, and they were fanatically superstitious. Black sacrificial altars stood in every chief's court. Captives were offered up, skulls set as foundations, hearts thrown into the flames, blood used like ink to trace Mordor's dark sigils. Hidden in a shadowed corner and watching one such ritual, Dewey felt his mouth tighten. He had wanted to intervene at first, to rescue the doomed captives, but legitimacy told him the truth. These people were beyond saving. Those who were sacrificed today would in time be those who made sacrifices tomorrow. They were caught in a cycle they would perpetuate. With cold clarity, he turned away. Even more disturbing was the effect the sacrifice had. When the blood and rites were complete, the statue of Sauron would leak a black, malignant power. The crowd would drink it in and go into a frenzied ecstasy, like addicts chasing their next hit. They seemed stronger, fiercer, more violent, but Dewey knew better. The strength was an illusion. The dark power consumed life itself to fuel a temporary boost, eroding what it inhabited until it produced something neither fully human nor spirit, a creature bound to Sauron. Dewey intended to leave, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the region, when a sharp, piercing cry split the air. He turned toward the sound and saw in the distance a giant black thing with membranous wings, like some terrible pterosaur, cutting through the sky. "A fell beast," he murmured. The tribespeople did not scatter. Instead, they cheered and cried out in adoration. "The divine messenger has come. The messenger of the god is here." A fell beast swooped low and landed on the altar, and atop it was a ringwraith. Dewey felt a chill run down his spine. If a ringwraith discovered him in the east, it would bring Sauron's attention, trouble he did not need. He could not afford any more complications. But the fell beast was already close. Apparating away now would make a noise that would attract the wraith. His disillusionment charm could fool mortal eyes, but not the seeing of a ringwraith. With no better option, he dropped the charm, took his Easterling guise fully, and melted into the crowd. The fell beast reeked of rot and radiated a fearsome aura. Its long tail lashed out and sent several onlookers flying into the stone platform. The crowd barely noticed. They were too frenzied with worship. The ringwraith dismounted, bowed toward Sauron's statue, and then thrust a phantom hand into the idol's chest. From it poured wailing spirits, the recent sacrifices alongside the spirits of those offered long ago. The wraith, a void of hunger, pulled them in and swallowed them until nothing remained. When it had had its fill, the ringwraith's hollow voice rasped over the crowd. "Your offerings satisfy me. As a reward, you shall receive a blessing." Black power poured from it, forming a mist that surged into the throng. People lunged for the shadow as if fearing to be left behind. They drank it in hungrily. Flesh browned and withered, eyes went hard with cruelty and madness, faces changed into something wicked. Those more deeply consumed became less living, and if they died, their souls turned into malevolent shades bound to the wraith. Hidden in the mass, Dewey cursed his luck. He could not allow that dark mist inside him. He resisted it. That act marked him like a flare. The ringwraith's attention snapped to him in an instant. "You are not from here," it intoned, and red light stabbed from its hollow eyes. A suffocating, terror-filled aura unfurled from the wraith, settling like a physical weight over Dewey. Chapter 224, Dongi City. When the ringwraith discovered him, Dewey didn't hesitate. He pulled out a potion bottle and flung it straight at the rider. The ringwraith, wary, tried to snuff it away with a burst of dark power, but the bottle detonated in midair, unleashing a blinding, searing light. Everyone instinctively shut their eyes. Those who couldn't react were instantly blinded by the glare. "Sunlight!" the ringwraith hissed, feeling the unmistakable quality of the sun in the flash. Ringwraiths were less vulnerable to sunlight than orcs or trolls, but even they found it agonizing. The rider's black cloak whipped around him like bat wings. The fell beast that bore him panicked at the same light, thrashing wildly and trampling the Easterlings nearby, turning the skirmish into chaos. The bottle had contained a flash potion Dewey had prepared, essentially a magical flashbang. Using the idea of the light of Arendelle and notes he'd studied from Professor Snape, Dewey had infused a standard flash potion with properties of sunlight. In the world of magic, it was a bit redundant, but against Middle-earth's dark creatures, it was deadly effective. The light exploded, and Dewey apparated away as soon as it did. When the glare died down, the ringwraith peeled back his cloak and stared at the fluorescent liquid smeared over the ground, and then at the space where Dewey had just been. Rage flamed in the rider's hollow eyes. With a roar of power, he unleashed a terrifying aura that sent people and even nearby buildings skidding aside. Countless were killed or maimed in an instant. "Who was that?" the ringwraith demanded, but no one answered. Anger and panic drove him to command the nearby Easterling tribes to hunt down the man who had looked like one of them. Dewey, unaware at first that a hunt had been ordered, was cautious by the time the rumors reached him. He shifted his appearance again, taking on a different Easterling's face, and kept moving east. At each settlement, he changed his guise anew. Easterling tribes were tribal and primitive, so moving through them required constant adaptation. Dongi City, however, was not typical. It lay east of the Sea of Rune, beneath the great Orokarni Mountains, the Red Mountains of Old Kenya, where several of the dwarf lines had first awakened. Under Sauron's long shadow in the far east, some of those dwarves had turned dark and fallen under his sway. Like the Easterlings, they served him. Dongi City had once been the seat of Kamal, the head of the Easterlings, the very ringwraith whose ring Dewey had destroyed and whose being Dewey had eliminated. By removing Kamal, Dewey had cut one of Sauron's direct levers over the Easterlings. The power vacuum had left the region unstable. Dewey's journey took longer than it should have. After his attack, ringwraith patrols in the Far East had swelled to 3 riders, circling on fell beasts. Crows and vampire bats multiplied both day and night. Easterling tribes grew increasingly suspicious, capturing and killing strangers, rather than risk letting one go. Dewey had to be careful. Sauron's reach was long, and the Palantiri could see much. Dewey's own stone was small. It let him view regions around Weathertop. Sauron's larger seeing stone watched Mordor and parts of Gondor, and even had lines of sight out to the far east. If the Dark Lord suspected Dewey's presence, the Palantir could expose him. A month after he set out, Dewey finally arrived at Dongyi. Calling it a city was generous. At its heart stood a palace of vast red stones, Camul's former seat. The place was a melting pot of Easterling tribes, Wainriders, Balchoth, Chiahil, and more. Where Camul had ruled, no tribe had dared make a claim. With him gone, every group hungered for the throne. Dewey materialized at an empty section of the city wall and watched. Outside, Dongyi, thousands of Easterlings were locked in battle. Two of the strongest branches, the Wainriders and the Balchoth, were fighting to decide who would take the city. The Wainriders, famous for their chariots, were gradually pressing an advantage with their wheels and discipline, while the Balchoth, fierce and numerous, held stubbornly. The battlefield rang with metal and cries. Just as it seemed the Wainriders might break their foe, a third force thundered onto the field. Cavalry in armor and fine tack, more polished than either of the other two armies, spurred down from the distant wood and mountains and cut into both sides without discrimination. "It's the Dorwinians!" someone shouted. Neither the Wainriders nor the Balchoth had expected a third party. Exhausted and bloodied, they couldn't resist. The Dorwinians, who maintained trade with the Elves of Dorwinion, with Dale and the Woodland Realm, were one of the rare Easterling groups that had not bent the knee to Sauron. More than that, they were closely associated with the Blue Wizards. Legend had it the Blue Wizards had helped them resist Sauron's oppression. When Dewey saw them now, his heart leapt. This could be a lead to the very Blue Wizards he'd been searching for. The Dorwinian cavalry struck hard, and for a time it seemed they might sweep the battle clean. Then a terrifying cry tore the air. A fell beast appeared on the wind, and wherever it flew, the courage of men and beasts sank into the earth. Horses shied, riders reeled, the Dorwinians' mounts panicked and bolted. The fell beast's shriek was a blade of despair. The ringwraith astride it radiated cold and terror. The Dorwinians, already pressed by the Wainriders and Balchoth, found their morale shattered. Dewey's stomach dropped. Fell beasts always came with ringwraiths. For a moment, he considered vanishing. Appearing in the city could draw the riders' attention, but he did not want to lose the chance of contacting the Blue Wizards. He hesitated, then altered his appearance again. In a blink, he became an old, slight man, stooped and white-haired, resembling Gandalf enough to be recognized by those familiar with the Astari. The ringwraith's assault swept through the Dorwinian ranks with brutal efficiency. Their cavalry was thrown into confusion and slaughter. Dewey watched, torn between the urge to help and the need to remain hidden. At that instant, the system pinged. Hogwarts Sign-in System. Location detected. Dongyi City. "Do you wish to sign in?" Dewey's spirits lifted. He clicked the prompt without hesitation. "Sign-in successful. Congratulations, you have obtained the recipe for the invisibility cloak." Dewey blinked. He hadn't expected to unlock the second Deathly Hallow so quickly. The cloak might be invaluable later, but it wouldn't stop the ringwraith now. Down below, the Dorwinians were on the verge of annihilation. He had to act. "Evil, be gone!" Dewey cried, gripping a staff he had transfigured into his hands. A pure, dazzling holy light flared from its tip, cutting through the gloom and casting the riders and Fellbeast in harsh brilliance. Chapter 225, Dumbledore. To avoid revealing who he really was, Dewey adopted the persona of a strange old wizard and only used the holy light spell he had learned from Gandalf. The sacred radiance made the ringwraith writhe, and the Fellbeast shrieked in panic, beating its wings and climbing higher until it tried to keep away from the light. The ringwraith exhaled a gout of black breath and fixed its red, burning eyes on the sudden intruder. "Who are you?" it hissed. "I am Albus Dumbledore, foul spirit. This is not your domain. Return to the netherworld." Dewey called, hardening his voice. He struck his staff, sending a wave of enchanted light that forced both the ringwraith and the Fellbeast back. "Albus Dumbledore? Never heard of him," the ringwraith sneered, voice cold and mocking. Its eyes flashed with malice. "This is the Dark Lord's territory. You dare appear here? Then remain and become his servant forever." It drew a Morgul blade and dissolved into a shadow, lunging. Before the blade could reach him, an invisible, almost indestructible barrier stopped it. Dewey had activated the rings of power on his finger and formed a magic shield. Under Celebrimbor's guidance, he had given those rings a basic cloaking trait. Like the 3 elven rings, they were invisible to everyone but their wearer, unless he willed otherwise. That was why Dewey could use them openly without being detected. The ringwraith battered the shield, but Dewey had been careful. He had filled the rings with a month's worth of stored power before leaving for the east, and had topped them up whenever he could during the journey. The shield could hold out for a very long time. Still, Dewey did not want to waste that precious, painstakingly accumulated power. He lifted his staff and intoned an ancient elven invocation. The sky darkened, and a bolt of lightning descended, vanishing into the staff. It was no thunderbolt of Gandalf or Saruman, only a sinuous, arm-thick strike, the limit of the lightning Dewey could call. He drove the staff forward. The lightning shot past the ringwraith and struck the fell beast. The monster screamed as its long neck was torn apart, black, poisonous ichor spraying from the wound. It plummeted to the earth, barely clinging to life. The ringwraith tried a mental assault, probing Dewey's mind, but hit a second barrier, as solid as stone. Dewey's mental shield shut out psychic attack and influence alike. The ringwraith had never met an opponent like this, both a physical magic shield and an impenetrable mind. It could find no weakness. Seeing it could accomplish nothing, and sensing Dewey preparing another lightning strike, the ringwraith withdrew. Its burning gaze lingered on Dewey. "Albus Dumbledore," it vowed, "I will remember you." Then, ignoring the dying fellbeast, it began to fade and retreated back into the shadows of the netherworld. Dewey exhaled the breath he had been holding. He had used only the magic of Middle-earth and kept his true identity carefully masked. Killing the ringwraith outright would have been catastrophic. Sauron would sense the death and turn his full attention to the east. That was a risk he could not take. But he also couldn't linger long. The sudden appearance of a mysterious wizard in the east would draw Sauron's scrutiny if he remained. He turned instead to the dying fellbeast and the Dorwinians scattered across the field. With a blunt strike from his staff, he ended the creature's suffering and then set its carcass alight. Only after that did he move among the Dorwinians to check on them. Their allies, Wainriders and Balcoth, had seen their divine messenger flee and their monstrous mount slain. Terrified, they fled the battlefield. Dewey ignored the rout. He approached a Dorwinian who wore the bearing of a leader. The man bowed deeply, eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "I am Balger, leader of the Dorwinians," the man stammered. "Thank you, Mr. Dumbledore, for saving us. If there is anything you command, tell us." He had heard Dewey's self-introduction. Dewey met Balger's gaze, then reached into his robes and tossed him a small potion bottle. "This contains a healing draught," he said. "1 drop to relieve wounds. Give it to your soldiers. We must leave at once. There are other ringwraith nearby, and if they come, you cannot hold out." Balger caught the bottle with trembling hands. He had no cause to doubt the stranger now. The Dorwinians, having seen Dewey's power, had little reason to suspect poison. If he had wanted them dead, he would have let them be. Balger began to administer the potion, and to their astonishment, the grievously wounded began to mend visibly after a few drops. For many of the survivors, the potion was nothing less than a miracle. Those who felt it too precious to waste were persuaded by Balger's orders and took it anyway, and their wounds closed. Balger used the entire bottle, giving drops to every living soldier. Those not beyond saving recovered quickly. The Dorwinians looked upon Dewey as a savior and treated the little bottle as a relic. Time was short. They gathered their supplies, set fire to the ruined royal city that had once belonged to Camul the Ringwraith, and withdrew. Unlike the pillaging Wainriders and Balcoth, the Dorwinians practiced guerrilla warfare. They harried Sauron's eastern allies, attacked supply lines, and wore down the occupation, tactics they had learned from the Blue Wizards. At the mention of the Blue Wizards, Dewey's interest brightened. "You know the Blue Wizards?" he asked. Balger nodded. "Romestamo the Wizard works mainly in Rune. Mornetar travels the south, Khand and Harad. The two are elusive. They saved our ancestors from the Dark Lord and taught us methods to resist. We can try to contact Romestamo for you, but whether he will come, I cannot promise." "That will do," Dewey said. "Please contact him." They rode hard, day and night, and arrived at the Dorwinian encampment by dawn on the second day. Baldur led Dewey to a small temple where two weathered stone statues stood, each holding a staff. One wore a cloak and a long beard, the other's beard was shorter. Their faces were mostly hidden, and their presence felt mysterious and reverent. "These are the blue wizards," Baldur explained. "Romestamo and Morinitar. We built these statues in gratitude for what they did for our people." Dewey examined the statues, intrigued. At their feet was a stone basin filled with clear water. Runes had been carved into the stone, faintly glowing, and the water itself thrummed with a peculiar light. Baldur stepped forward and touched the basin reverently. "This is holy water," he said. "We have our children baptized here, so they may avoid corruption by darkness and evil spirits." Dewey felt a jolt of recognition. This rite had echoes of a faith he knew from another life, but the basin's power was unmistakable. Baldur traced a few simple signs above the water. The surface rippled, and a dim image, like an illusion, gathered in the center. "You can use magic?" Dewey asked, surprised at the faint magical fluctuation. Baldur shook his head with a rueful smile. "Romestamo taught our forebears some witchcraft, so we could defend ourselves. I'm no wizard, I only know a few crude rites." The water's image sharpened, and a figure in blue robed itself there, eyes like deep pools of night. A voice drifted up, calm and amused. "Baldur, what is it you call me for?" Chapter 226, First Meeting with the Blue-Robed Wizard. An old wizard in blue appeared in the stone basin's scrying surface. His face was gaunt, eyes deep with hard-won wisdom, and a gray goatee framed his mouth. He was Romestamo, one of the two blue wizards. Like Gandalf and Saruman, his name was a title, meaning Savior of the East, given by those he had aided beyond the sea. His counterpart, Morinitar, bore a name that could be rendered Darkness Vanquisher. Both were Maiar, servants of Orome, the Vala of the Hunt. Morinitar had volunteered to come to Middle-earth to help the free peoples against Sauron, and had persuaded his friend Romestamo to accompany him. Together, they had gone into the east, treading the lands once haunted by Orome himself, and had aided human tribes who had cast off the worship of Morgoth, fomenting rebellions and harrying Sauron from behind his lines. Baldur, leader of the Dorwinians, watched the image in the basin with reverent attention. He leaned forward to report the previous day's battle at Dongi City. "Romestamo," he said, voice tight with respect, "we were saved from the ringwraiths and fell beasts by another wizard. He wishes to see you. Will you?" Romestamo raised an eyebrow. "A wizard? What sort of wizard?" "He says his name is Albus Dumbledore, and that he is from the west," Baldur answered. Dewey, who had been standing nearby, felt awkward at the mention and stepped forward to the basin. He spoke up, correcting him with a smile. "Greeting, Wizard Romestamo. My name is Duir. I came under the guidance of Gandalf the Grey and Radagast the Brown." At his words, his aged guise rippled and fell away, restoring him to his true appearance. Baldur gaped as the old man he had been speaking with became a tall, young wizard. Romestamo in the basin looked surprised at the transformation, but then he smiled warmly. "So it is Duir, the black-robed wizard," the blue wizard said. "I did not expect you to be so young. Though I dwell in the east, your deeds in the west have reached even me. We who have done less feel ashamed." "You are too modest, Wizard Romestamo," Duir returned quickly. "If you and Morinitar did not hold Sauron back in the east, the west would already have fallen." They traded news at length, accounts of the east and of the west, before Romestamo leaned forward, his expression turning more serious. "Duir, you have come a long way. Is there a purpose to your visit?" Duir seized the chance. "Wizard Romestamo, you have been in the east for a long time. Do you know the location of Hildorian, the birthplace of men?" At the name, a flicker of surprise crossed Romestamo's face. "You wish to find Hildorian?" "Yes." Duir's voice carried a hunger that had been gnawing at him. "There is a substance there I need. Over the ages, the place has been forgotten, but since you and Morinar have wandered the east, perhaps you have seen it." Romestamo smiled, a warm, rueful grin. "Many do not know Hildorian, but Morinar and I do. When we first came east, we wandered and searched before we stumbled on it. It lies far to the east, westward bounded by the mountains of the wind, to the east by the great sea." He fell into pleasant recollection. "It is a secluded valley, the Valley of Slumber, wrapped in sacred power. It could rival the Blessed Realm for sanctity and beauty. The soil and streams there are full of life. Morinitar and I stayed a while. Had it not been for our mission, we might have retired there. Duir felt his spirits lift. After long searching, he had at last pulled a definite lead. But Romistamo's smile softened and grew grave. There is a catch. Hildorian is shrouded in sacred power. Unless certain conditions are met, even with the clearest map you cannot see it, much less enter it. What conditions? Duir asked, hurried. Men first awoke when the first light of the sun fell on Middle-earth. The first day of the first age, Romistamo answered. Hildorian only appears when the first ray of sunlight strikes on New Year's Day. Only then is the Valley of Slumber open. This year's New Year has passed. If you would enter Hildorian, you must wait until the next. Duir was disappointed, but not crushed. The year was almost gone, after all. Romistamo added, If you are willing to wait, when I finish here, I will prepare a route map for you. It will let you find Hildorian when the valley reveals itself. Duir's gratitude was immediate. I would be much obliged, wizard. Thank you. He also wanted to offer help in return. Is there anything I can do for you while you are here? Romistamo hesitated, then sighed. It is about Morinitar. I fear he has run into trouble in Harad, in the south. Duir's brow went up. Trouble? I cannot yet say for certain, Romistamo replied. The matter cannot be explained in a few words. We will speak of it when I come to meet you in person. Queries crowded Duir's mind, but Romistamo drew back from the topic. They ended the conversation with an agreement to meet in the Dorwinian settlement. Duir spent the next days in the Dorwinians' lands. A fortnight later, the settlement erupted in cheer. A wizard in a deep blue robe had arrived, riding a massive wild ox. It was Romistamo in the flesh. The Dorwinians crowded around him with reverence, viewing him as their deliverer. He greeted them kindly, remembering many of their names, before fixing his gaze on Duir and nodding in recognition. Romistamo guided his ox to Duir's side, dismounted with an easy grace, and smiled. Wizard Duir, this is our first proper meeting. I heard much of you in the West. It is good to see you, truly. Duir felt a different quality in Romistamo than in Gandalf or Saruman. He had the calm mystery of the wizards, but also a wilder, more hunter-like edge, as of a man who had lived much outdoors. Behind him, the ox drew Duir's attention, a creature larger than any ordinary bull, pale as drifted snow, its fur catching the light and haloing it. Two enormous white horns curled from its head with a noble, sacred air. Is this your mount? It is magnificent, Duir said. Romistamo's smile broadened, and he patted the beast. This is Norlamar, an Aurochs, kin to Aroma's ox. I found him as a calf in the hills by the Sea of Rune, and he has ridden with me ever since. Norlamar answered with a low, intelligent moo. Duir thought of Aroma's other servants, Huan, the hound, the ancestor of the Mearas, and now Aroma's ox. Each divine line had its gifts. Huan struck terror into Morgoth's beasts. The Mearas could outrun any horse. He wondered what powers the descendants of Aroma's ox might possess. Norlamar blinked at him, as if puzzled by his scrutiny. Duir laughed and set the thought aside. Romistamo drew a sheet of parchment from his robes and handed it to Duir. This is the route map to Hildorian, he said. Duir unfurled the map and felt joy rise in him as he traced the path that would let him find the Valley of Slumber on the morning the sacred power revealed it. Thank you, Duir said simply. With that map, he could reach Hildorian at New Year and obtain the final ingredient he sought for the Philosopher's Stone, the salt of the flesh. Then Duir pressed the matter that had worried Romistamo. You said Morinitar ran into trouble. What is the plan? Do you need my aid? Romistamo's face tightened with worry. When we first came east, we worked together, but Sauron's influence there is so wide that we had to separate. I ranged among the Easterlings. Morinitar went south into Khand and Harad. We kept in regular touch, but recently his messages stopped. I have a very bad feeling. Duir felt the concern prick at him. What will you do? I had hoped at first to go alone, Romistamo said quietly, but something tells me that rescue will be perilous, that a single misstep could bring ruin. Then I met you, and I felt a turning. I would ask you to come south with me, to help find Morinitar. Duir looked at the blue wizard, at the steady, grave gaze that had sent maps and warnings across the continent. Between the need in the south and his own mission in the east, decisions waited for the New Year's first light. He bowed his head slightly. I will go with you. Chapter 227, Rescue premonition? Dewey knew that beings like Romestamo and Gandalf possessed an intuition almost prophet-like. Still, he hesitated. If Morinetar was in danger, and Romestamo, who intended to rescue him, had felt it, what could a lesser wizard like Dewey possibly change? Yet Romestamo had just helped him. He could not refuse outright. After a moment's struggle, Dewey sighed inwardly. He could not stand by while two blue wizards were threatened. He understood, in broad strokes, the contribution the blue wizards had made, holding back Sauron's influence in the east and easing pressure on the western realms during the War of the Ring. After the war, only Gandalf among the Astari had returned to Valinor. Saruman's treachery had cost him that right. Radagast had become so absorbed in Middle-earth's wilds that he remained there, and the fate of the two blue wizards was murky. Many assumed they had failed, which explained why they did not return. Dewey did not know how they might have failed, but seeing Morinetar in peril and watching Romestamo head out to save him, a grim possibility formed in his mind. If they lost Morinetar now, hope in the east could collapse and Sauron's forces would surge unchecked. He could not let that happen. He accepted Romestamo's invitation. Romestamo, whose true name was Pallando, was visibly relieved and grateful. He and Morinetar had been close friends since they answered the call to Middle-earth together. Morinetar had borne the name Alatar before. When Alatar volunteered for the Eastern mission, Pallando had gone with him to resist Sauron's spreading shadow. Knowing Morinetar's courage, Romestamo would not hesitate to try to save him. "I know this journey will be dangerous," Romestamo said, "and I am endlessly grateful that you will come." He unfastened a white horn, hand inlaid with gold, from beneath his robe. "This is the horn of victory. Its sound travels leagues. It terrifies foes, heartens allies, and can summon friends from far away. I carried it with me from Valinor. I give it to you. Please don't refuse." Dewey was surprised that the horn came from Valinor. Its significance was obvious. He at first protested, refusing to take something so precious from his companion. "I cannot take what you cherish, Wizard Romestamo. This has been with you for so long. Please keep it." Romestamo would not hear of it. He pressed the horn into Dewey's hands and shook his head. "Morinetar and I made this together. If we rescue him, we can make another. If we fail, it's meaningless to me." Faced with Romestamo's insistence, Dewey accepted. The horn was unlike any ordinary ox horn. It was pure white, almost like polished jade, radiating a quiet, sacred light. Ancient, mysterious runes crawled along its length. It was a sound weapon. Its blast could strike fear into enemies and generate devastating sound waves, yet to allies it was an inspiring cry. Crucially, its call could carry thousands of miles and bring comrades swiftly to aid. With such an artifact entrusted to him, Dewey's resolve hardened. He would not dishonor Romestamo's gift by turning back. They did not linger among the Dorwinian people. The two set out south toward Khand and Harad. Khand lay southeast of Mordor and was home to the Variegs, fierce horsemen not unlike the Rohirrim. Harad, south of Mordor, was a far larger and more varied land. Near Haradrim, who resembled Gondorians, far Haradrim of darker complexion and wilder customs, and in some regions even twisted half-bestial folk who had interbred with trolls and orcs. The Haradrim tamed enormous war elephants, the Mumakil, which served as living siege towers. Morinetar had been active in these regions for some time, fomenting rebellion, infiltrating leaders, and undermining Sauron's hold from within. Dewey listened to Romestamo's stories of Morinetar's deeds with awe. The two blue wizards had fought in very different ways, Pallando organizing guerrilla resistance in the east, Alatar working stealthily, piece by piece dismantling Sauron's influence from within. Their combined efforts were formidable. Dewey flew low on his broom, while Romestamo rode a wild ox that matched his pace. To avoid attention, they skirted uninhabited terrain, bypassing the tribal lands of Khand. After a week, they passed into Harad. Harad was dangerous and chaotic. Near its coasts and roads were pirates, bandits, and black Númenóreans, descendants of Númenor, twisted by Sauron's sway and now part of his forces. The two avoided the main Harad road and crossed the desert toward Minas Harad, a fortress city built deep in a valley to dominate the region. From behind a sand dune, they watched the citadel, a great walled stronghold ringed with watchtowers, guarded by Haradrim troops, orcs, and huge Mumakil. Dark clouds churned overhead and giant bats circled the highest tower. Romistamo, are you sure Morinitar is in that fortress? Dewey whispered. Romistamo closed his eyes and, for a moment, invoked the bond he shared with his friend. He called softly, Alatar, Alatar. The sound of his voice carried a subtle power. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze fixed on the high tower in the center of Minas Harad. He's in that high tower, Romistamo said. I can feel him there. They had to decide how to reach that tower. Minas Harad was heavily garrisoned. If their actions drew Sauron's notice, the consequences could be catastrophic. We should try to slip inside and rescue him quietly, Dewey suggested. If stealth fails, we'll fight our way out. Dewey cast disillusionment on himself, and then on Romistamo, rendering them invisible. They left the ox in hiding nearby, ready to be summoned. Under cover of the night, they approached the fortress, avoiding the roaming Mumakil. Invisible, they passed the outer guards. An orc nearby sniffed suspiciously, but Dewey whispered, Confundo, and the spell struck the creature. Its eyes glazed, and it forgot its alarm. They slipped past checkpoints, evading patrols until they stood at the base of the tower. Giant bats wheeled about the tower, and sentries stood on its terraces. Apparating up directly would risk attracting the bats, so they climbed, moving floor by floor through shadowed stairwells. At the top they found an iron cage of spikes. Inside, slumped and broken, was Morinetar. He looked battered and tortured, his staff gone, his body gaunt and weak. Romistamo's face crumpled. He ignored the danger and struck the cage with his staff. The iron shattered. The cage fell apart, and they drew Morinetar free. The bats shrieked at the disturbance and swept at them. Protego Maxima, Dewey cried, and a vast shield of warding formed to ward off the bats' ferocious assaults. Romistamo hurried to his friend, but Morinetar lay unconscious and near death. Romistamo began to call on healing arts when Dewey stopped him gently, and from inside his cloak produced a gilded goblet and a small vial of recovery potion. He poured the potion into the goblet and shook it, letting the goblet's enchantments amplify the brew, then fed the liquid to Morinetar. Slowly, vitality returned. Morinetar's eyes opened, but instead of relief at seeing Romistamo, terror filled his face. This is a trap, he rasped, struggling to sit up. You, get out! You must leave. Chapter 228, Fight Saruman Again. When Morinetar warned them, Dewey and Romistamo flinched. The giant bats that had been harrying them abruptly ceased their attacks, circling the tower in a tight, deafening ring and unleashing a piercing ultrasonic shriek. The sound hammered at Dewey and Romistamo's skulls and ribs as if trying to shatter bone and organ. Dewey clenched his teeth and cast a silencing charm, wrapping himself, Romistamo, and Morinetar in a protective hush. The pain eased, only for a moment. The bats intensified their assault. The tower's stone began to vibrate and spiderweb with new cracks. Romistamo shouted over the roar, Dewey, blow the horn of victory, now! Dewey drew the horn and blew with everything he had. The blast blasted out like a rising crimson sun, a bright, pure cry that cut through the bats' ultrasonic noise. The horn's sound wave countered and even stunned the bats. They were suddenly deaf and bewildered, careening blindly into one another. The Haradrim and orcs below, hearing the horn, lost their nerve and scattered in panic. Dewey moved to apparat them away, but his face went white. He couldn't. The ward had returned, the same sensation that had hunted him before. Cold air rolled in, and a shadow of dread fell over the scene. From the darkness stepped 3 ringwraiths, their presence like a physical weight pressing from 3 sides. A fell beast circled in, its rider unmistakable. Saruman perched upon it like a grim king. Saruman's eyes lit with malicious delight as he looked up at the damaged tower. Aha! What a pleasant surprise. I meant only to catch a big fish, but you've come to my doorstep, boy. He fixed his gaze on Dewey. Black Wizard Dewey, how fares Orthanc? I've dreamed day and night of getting you into my hands to torment you. Imagine my luck. Romistamo's face went hard at the sight of the staff in Saruman's hand. Morinetar's staff, unmistakably. Rage and disbelief flared. Saruman, he spat, you conspired with Sauron against Morinetar. Have you forgotten our mission? Saruman merely sneered. Mission? My mission is to seize power, to be master of the world. You mean overthrow Sauron? Dewey scoffed. But Saruman did not dignify the jibe with an answer. He nodded toward the ringwraiths. Deal with the other blue wizard. This black wizard is mine. The ringwraiths drew their Morgul blades and became three black shadows that surged to encircle Romestamo. Saruman pressed in on Duir. Murentar, stripped of his staff and weakened by whatever torment he had endured, could barely stand. Romestamo planted himself between the old blue wizard and the wraiths, parrying with his staff as the three ringwraiths, bolstered by the 9 rings of men, struck with terrible sorcery and deadly blades. For a while the duel steadied, both sides met blow for blow. Duir's fury rose. "Avada Kedavra," he shouted, releasing a killing curse. Saruman merely raised a slab of rubble and blocked it. Duir kept firing spells in a blinding barrage, a stream of dazzling light and thunderous explosions. The tower shuddered under the aftershocks, its masonry splintering. Saruman parried each attack with a smirk. "You petty tricks won't harm me, Black Wizard," he taunted. "If you have nothing else, you will stay right here today." He hurled a towering, scorching fireball. Duir threw up a shield charm. The blast detonated like a buried charge, far stronger than a blasting curse, and the tower's upper floor blew out and collapsed in a rain of stone. At the heart of the blast, Duir's shield held them, and a golden ring glowed on his right middle finger, throwing up a strong magic barrier. Saruman's eyes went red when he saw it. "The Ring of Power!" he hissed, teeth bared. He lashed at the shield with everything he had, trying to reclaim the ring he had once forged. But Duir had already filled the band with his own magic. Its defenses held. Duir judged that, at current drain, the ring could keep them safe for at least a day, if it weren't pushed harder. He could not let the ring meekly bleed away. He grabbed the horn of victory and sounded it once more. The cry weakened the ringwraith's hold. The fell beast beneath Saruman shrieked and bucked, nearly throwing its rider. Seizing the chance, Duir loosed another killing curse, not at Saruman, but at his mount. The curse struck the fell beast square in the chest. It died in an instant, mid-scream, and fell from the sky. Saruman was not slow. He wheeled in the air and leaped from the crashing beast, landing feet first on the tower amid tumbling stones. Before he could even collect himself, Duir slammed his staff down and activated the ring. A shockwave ripped through the tower, fissures webbed out, load-bearing stones sheared like brittle bone, and the whole structure began to unravel. They went down with it. The tower disintegrated around them. Rubble and dust filled the air as the roof, floors, and walls collapsed. The Haradrim and orcs trapped beneath were crushed. Duir's shield still held them, he, Romestamo, and a battered Morinetar, and it slowed their fall as if they were drifting in a balloon. The ringwraiths were unaffected by such things, but Saruman, a flesh-and-blood man tumbling from great height, somehow survived with little more than bruises and ruined robes. He carved a path through the rubble, eyes blazing. "Duir," he snarled, "today you die." He thrust his staff skyward. The heavens roiled, and a thick bolt of lightning struck down, funneled through his staff toward Duir. The bolt, as wide as a bucket, slammed into the shield with a thunderous crack. Light lanced, and the ring's stored power surged to meet it, and the result was rapid drain. Duir realized with cold clarity that the lightning had accelerated the ring's depletion. That shield, which might have held for a day, would now fail within hours, perhaps less. Duir's face set. If the ring failed while Saruman still stood, it would be the end. He made the terrible choice he had made before, Fiendfire. He poured everything into summoning it and set Minas Herod alight. Fiendfire devoured combustibles like a living plague, incinerating orcs and men, and soon the fire coalesced into a monstrous Fiendfire dragon that roared through the city. Saruman only snorted. He sent out a violent shockwave that hurled the fire creature back, then intoned an old, cruel enchantment and called up a tornado. The twisting column grew, sucking up the yellow desert sand into a roiling vortex that swallowed the Fiendfire. Sand smothered the flames, and despite the dragon's struggles, the fire dwindled and died. The tornado's sand became a hail of sharp pellets that shredded any unlucky soldiers caught in it. Saruman turned the cyclone toward Duir. Duir held the shield, planting his feet, trying to resist the suction. The tornado ripped boulders and small buildings loose. The shield could not anchor them. Sooner than he wanted, the three of them were dragged into the maelstrom. The world spun and blurred. Within the magic bubble, they were like ants trapped in a blown-up lantern, tumbling and buffeted. Sand pelted the shield with 1,000 little drumbeats. Duir felt sick. His stomach churned, and his head spun as they were battered about inside that howling, grinding drum. They were being flung and tossed through the sky by the tornado. Duir felt sick. "Rumastamo, think! What can you do?" he shouted, but the wind swallowed his words. Rumastamo cradled the frail Morinetar in one arm and heard him all the same, not with ears, but in his head. His mental voice came clear and calm. "You protect Morinetar. Then release me outside your ward. I will do everything I can to stop the storm." "Are you sure?" Duir cried. Outside the ward, the winds could shred a man. But Rumastamo answered without hesitation. Duir had no choice but to trust him. He opened the magic shield and released Rumastamo into the tornado. Rumastamo became like a falling leaf, snatched by the gale, spinning in its terrible maw. Duir watched with a tightening stomach as the blue-robed wizard was buffeted and torn. Then, from the heart of the vortex, a faint, strange chant rose. Light flared at its center, and in the next instant, a vast magical shockwave detonated outward. The tornado faltered under that force, then split as if struck at the waist, leaving a colossal vacuum. Rumastamo hovered in that gap, staff in hand. His blue robe was shredded, his flesh scored with innumerable cuts. Without the tornado's support, he fell. Duir, still inside the ward with Morinetar, dove to catch him. He hauled Rumastamo back beneath the shield, and, as the three of them hurtled toward the ground, cast a spell to soften their fall. They landed gently, but there was no time to rest. Saruman and the ringwraiths struck again. "Desist, Duir," Saruman's voice dripped with hypnotic suggestion. "Look at yourself, struggling like a trapped beast. Give up. There is no hope." Duir had changed since those last days. He had built an inner fortress with occlumency. Saruman's words could not find purchase. The wizard's vocal glamour slid from him as if hitting stone. Duir drew the horn of victory and blew. The clear blast disrupted Saruman's enchantment and cut the voice's reach. Saruman's face twisted with irritation. Rumastamo planted himself between Saruman and the others, staff raised. He spoke into Duir's mind at once. "Duir, I will hold Saruman. You must take Morinetar and leave now. He is growing weaker. Leave him be and find help. Do not waste time on me." "What about you?" Duir telepathed back, panic in every pulse. Rumastamo's expression was grave. His mental voice sharpened. "We cannot stay. Something darker approaches. The longer we remain, the harder it will be to escape. Take Morinetar and go. Don't argue. I have a way to get away after I hold them off." Duir didn't believe it. If Rumastamo could have escaped, he would never have stayed to cover them. It looked very much like sacrifice. But Rumastamo's determination was absolute, and there was no time for debate. "He's coming," Rumastamo suddenly said aloud, his gaze drawn north toward Mordor. An alarmed fear broke over his face. "Go, take Morinetar and leave quickly." At that instant, a white wild ox burst through the fray, charging down Haradrim and orcs as if they were nothing. It skidded to a halt beside Rumastamo. The wizard placed the weakened Morinetar on its back. "Duir," he said, "do not mind me. Go. I am still useful to them. If I am captured, they will not kill me. You must save Morinetar, then find others to rescue me." Rumastamo turned and hurled himself toward Saruman without another look, unleashing a blow of raw power. He threw his whole strength into holding Saruman and the ringwraiths at bay, buying Duir the chance to flee. Duir hesitated only a heartbeat, then obeyed. He and Morinetar spurred the ox and fled. Saruman sneered as he watched them go, reading the ploy for what it was. Creating a corridor for escape? Foolish, he spat. No one leaves this night. He threw himself fully into his sorcery and ordered the three ringwraiths. Stop them. Saruman's force as a white wizard outweighed most others. Though Rumastamo matched him blow for blow, Saruman pressed the advantage. The three ringwraiths swept for Duir and the ox. Duir dared not dallied. He drew the phial of starlight, poured magic into it, and released the light of Earendil. The holy radiance drove the wraiths back, for they recoiled from such light. Duir did not linger. He took Morinetar and fled. For a while, the wizard duel turned the ramparts of Minas Harad into a ruin. Stone groaned, and towers collapsed under the shock of their spells. Haradrim and orcs scattered, terrified to be caught in the crossfire. Then, as if someone had pressed a halt switch on the world, their screams were choked off. The wind died. Night thickened into a living blackness. A crushing pressure settled on every chest like a giant hand. Thousands of whispering voices seemed to curl through the air, coaxing, despairing, like cold, slimy things trying to burrow into the mind. Mordor, still on the ox's back, gaped in horror. He has come, he croaked. The clash between Romastamo and Saruman froze. Saruman's face was a mask of complex emotion, anger at being interrupted, and some reluctant awe. Romastamo wore plain terror and a solemn regret. He was spent, his reserves were nearly empty, but he fought to reach Duir and Mordor before the true terror struck. Darkness peeled open the sky. A vertical rift tore the night like a wound. Shadows swirled inside it as though alive, forming black tendrils that snapped and reached. From the slit a thing stepped, less a body than an absence of light, a faceless humanoid silhouette that swallowed everything around it. 2 pins of crimson light burned where eyes might have been, cold and ancient. At its feet the 3 ringwraiths sank to their knees in obeisance. Even Saruman bowed, reluctant but compelled. The black figure spoke, the sound slid into their minds like honey laced with poison. Sauron, Romastamo whispered, the name torn from him. Duir knew at once this was no mere eye, this was Sauron's true presence. The eye had been a symbol, a distant spirit. Here stood the will itself, drawn into shape for the moment. White wizard Saruman, blue wizards Mordor and Romastamo, and black wizard Duir, Sauron intoned. His voice wound into their thoughts, seductive and corrosive. To gather so many wizards together, what an unexpected pleasure. His crimson gaze swept over the 2 blue wizards. Mordor, Romastamo, you have vexed me for 1,000 years in the east. You stirred rebellion and cost me much. Yet I admire you, to hold me from full dominion of the east, to prevent me from bringing all my forces to bear on the west. Such resistance betrays talent. Join me, submit, and I will forgive. I will let you rule the east as my lieutenants. Together we will rule the world. What say you? The words were everywhere at once, like 1,000 whispers probing for cracks to widen. Ramastamo's mental defenses strained but held. You will not have us, he answered, voice blunt with scorn. You are the servant of Morgoth, nameless and faceless. You will fail. Sauron did not flare in anger. Amusement touched his tone. Is that so? Yet your companion may feel differently. Romastamo's eyes darted to Mordor. The younger wizard's face flickered between lucidity and frenzy as if 2 minds wrestled inside him. Romastamo's alarm spiked. He seized Mordor. Hold on, keep your will. Do not, he cried. Mordor's gaze was ravaged with conflict. His spirit was weak. Sauron's pressure was eroding him. Romastamo, kill me, he whispered, voice almost a sob. Don't let me fall. Romastamo could not bring himself to slay his friend. Instead, he threw up every scrap of his mental and spiritual strength to shield Mordor, to barricade his friend's mind against Sauron's invasion. He poured himself out as if his life were being sapped stone by stone. Sauron did not intervene. On the contrary, he watched with a smile like frost. Let him waste himself, the dark will thought. Let him drain his defenses. When Romastamo's guard was spent, it would be easy to break him and claim 2 minds at once. The logic pleased Sauron. He let them struggle. Romastamo's color drained. He trembled as he kept the mental ward, clinging to his friend's fraying will. Mordor sobbed against the oncoming shadow. Romastamo's own thoughts grew thin, his control slipping. The sacrifice was buying time. Time for Duir and Mordor to be elsewhere, but at a terrible cost. When Romastamo's mind faltered, Sauron turned his attention to Duir with languid interest. His voice slid into Duir's head like a cold blade. Duir, an existence outside of fate, always upsetting my designs. I have long been curious. Show me what secret makes you so different. Duir felt the heat of the stare as if where those crimson points gazed a fire had been set. He realized, with a clarity that did not bring comfort, that tonight everything had just become infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 230, Portkey facing Sauron's ravenous gaze and relentless mental assault, Duir kept every bit of his occlumency at full strength. The mental castle he'd built inside his mind was defended with care, each battlement guarded, refusing Sauron any easy purchase. But Sauron's power was vast. The seductive whispers poured in like a swarm of insects gnawing at the walls, probing for any weakness. Duir's face was pale. The gap between them was terrifying. He feared his mental defenses would not hold much longer. He dared not be careless for an instant. He activated the ring he wore, throwing up the strongest magical shield he could muster to protect himself, Romestamo and Morinetar. At the same time, he channeled the light of Arendil, the small crystal fiel, into his spirit, using it to resist the dark pressure. The light restrained shadow, but how well it worked depended on the wielder. Galadriel had used it against Sauron in Dol Guldur. Duir could barely make it last. Against Sauron's tidal surge of darkness, the phial was like a single candle in a storm, barely keeping the darkness at bay. Sauron noticed the resistance. His curiosity deepened as his attempts at corruption were repeatedly blocked. "Truly," he murmured, "every time we meet you, surprise me anew." His gaze swept past the ring's invisibility, straight to Duir's hand. "Is this Saruman's ring? It's improved, far more perfect than before. It reminds me of a certain elven smith from old. After I taught him the art, he forged 19 rings." He looked at Duir with a mixture of appraisal and invitation. "Wizard Duir, you have uncommon gifts. Abandon your resistance and submit to me. I will take you as my pupil. I will teach you to forge a one ring of your own, great power, unending authority. Together we will rule this world." Saruman's reaction was obvious: jealousy and fury. The ring he'd labored to craft was being admired again, yet now offered as encouragement to someone else, and Sauron, who had always coveted the one, casually offered to teach a mere wizard boy to make such a thing. Saruman knew Sauron was serious. The Dark Lord had once been Ale's finest pupil, a master smith before his fall. If Sauron had detected real talent in ring crafting, he would indeed seek to cultivate it. Saruman, for all his learning, lacked the same level of forging genius. His strengths lay in engineering and biological experiments. He'd stolen the forging methods from Sauron, but Sauron could still judge his work as inferior. What neither Sauron nor Saruman suspected was that Duir had a resurrection stone and, under its use, had summoned Celebrimbor himself, the great smith who had originally forged the Rings of Power. It was Celebrimbor's hand that had perfected the ring Saruman produced. Mistaking Duir alone for having improved the ring, Sauron grew impressed. That only stung Saruman further. Duir, however, scoffed and refused. "I won't become one of your ring wraiths, your puppet," he said. Sauron's offer had been tempting, to be taught the secrets of the One, to be elevated above countless others. But it would demand surrender of will, corruption of spirit. Duir refused without hesitation. Sauron did not rage. He only laughed softly as one watching a trapped creature thrash. "Very well. Your refusal now is no guarantee for the future. I will take you to Mordor. After some enlightenment, you will serve me." Then he struck. A wave of dark power slammed into Duir's ring shield. The force was so great that even Saruman's face showed fear, and he was forced to retreat. For Duir, it felt like a mountain pressing down on his chest. The ring's stored magic drained like water poured from a breached dam. The shield that would have held against Saruman's full assault for half a day could now last, Duir estimated, no more than half an hour. Worse, Sauron's mental corruption passed through and around the shield, probing Duir's mind, trying to breach his mental castle. Duir exhausted every defense, strict occlumency, reinforcing the walls of his mental fortress, empowering the light of Arendil, and even singing the protective, joyful music Tom Bombadil had taught him to raise his spirits and call forth a Patronus. Layer upon layer, he fought to keep his mind intact until the ring's magic gave out. For a brief while he could breathe, but the ring's magic ebbed alarmingly. Then the system prompt blinked in his mind. Hogwarts Sign-in System, location Harad, Minas Harad Castle, sign in. Hope flared. Duir focused. "Sign in, now," he thought urgently. "Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining a portkey." Relief and a sudden surge of energy swept through him. The portkey was the answer. Not apparition, which Saruman's wards outlawed, but a magical object that could transport anyone who touched it to a set destination, immune to anti-apparition charms. He plunged into learning the portkey charm. The invisible crown of wisdom perched in his head pushed his mind to its limits to master the incantation and the crafting of an item on the fly. The strain tugged at his defenses. Sauron, keen to every change in mood and thought, sensed the flicker of hope and redoubled his attack. The ring shield shuddered with each blow. Magic burned away even faster. Still, Duir kept working. With swift, precise gestures, he focused on the crystal bottle containing the light of Arendil. "Portus," he whispered, The phial quivered and gave off a faint blue glow. "Rummistomo, grab Morinitar and take the crystal bottle," Duir barked. Rummistomo was as pale as Duir, straining every ounce of his concentration to protect Morinitar's mind from Sauron's corruption. He had little left, but he forced himself to act. With one hand, he seized Morinitar. With the other, he touched the crystal phial. Duir took the last instant to press his palm to Rummistomo's bison. A sharp tug sprang from their navels, and the ground fell away beneath their feet. The world smeared and blurred as a sudden, violent pull carried them off. "No!" Sauron roared, furious and stunned. He poured forth a surge of his most terrible power to stop them, but the portkey's work had already completed. Duir, Rummistomo, Morinitar, and the bison vanished before his eyes. Sauron felt humiliated and enraged. He lashed out blindly. The invisible force that followed his wrath demolished Minas Harad. Walls crumpled. Mammoths and Haradrim and orcs were torn apart as the fortress imploded from that unleashed energy. The ring-wraiths fell prostrate in the dust, trembling with fear. Saruman, teeth gritted, leaned on his staff and chanted desperately to save himself, staring at Sauron with something between awe and terror. Chapter 231, Horcrux Isengard, thousands of miles from the far east. With a ripple in the air, Duir, Rummistomo, Morinitar, and the White Yak appeared outside Orthanc. When Duir took in the familiar sight of the tower in the valley, he let out a long, shaky breath. He had escaped. The ring of power on his finger was dimmed almost to dullness. The store of magic he had accumulated over half a year, magic equal to the strength of hundreds of him, had been drained away in only a few blows from Sauron. The light of Arendil in his hand was faded too. Duir felt a sharp ache at the loss. It would take months to build that power back up. Still, they had escaped, and they had rescued the two blue wizards. That alone counted for much. He turned to the two exhausted Maiar. "Rummistomo, Morinitar, are you both all right?" Rummistomo gave a tired smile and a slight nod. "I am. Thanks to you, we can go on. My visions never lied. You were our salvation." Morinitar's eyes were clear again, no longer wild from Sauron's intrusion, but his body and mind were weak. He used nearly all his will simply to keep the taint Sauron left within him from taking hold. Rummistomo's face filled with worry. Sauron had not wanted to kill them so much as to break them, to corrupt and bind them, turn them into servants, as he had Saruman. Morinitar, a Maia with a strong will, had resisted longer than most could have. Sauron had kept him in a high tower at Minas Harad, subjecting him to slow, constant torment until his defenses frayed and the dark will could seep in. It was a wonder he had held on at all. Rummistomo had little idea how to cleanse him completely. "Perhaps we should take him to Rivendell," Duir suggested. "Lord Elrond is the best healer in Middle-earth. He might be able to do something." Rummistomo's eyes brightened. "Then Duir, please take us to him." They had only met Elrond once, long ago in the east. They would need Duir's introduction. Duir led them into Orthanc and down into the Great Hall. Rummistomo stared at the cavernous space, then at the enormous three-headed dog resting there, far larger than his own mount, the Araba Yak. All three heads lifted at once, scenting them, teeth bared and throat embers beginning to glow. "Quiet," Duir snapped. "Cerberus guests, be civil." The beast instantly dropped its threat, wagged its triple tail, and whined, fawning over Duir. He patted each of its heads, half amused and half apologetic. All right, I can't play now. Big matters, later." Rummistomo laughed softly. "Is this your pet?" Duir shrugged. "Yes, Cerberus, a three-headed dog variant, just over a year old, still a handful." Rummistomo's admiration was plain. To have such power at a year old, with proper training, he may one day rival Huan himself. Duir only smiled. Huan was a divine hound, legendary. He had once brought Sauron to grievous defeat when Luthien rescued Beren. The memory of that ancient tale made Huan something beyond comparison. They did not linger. Duir led the two wizards to the hearthfire, and the company was whisked away to Rivendell. Elrond met them at once. "Was the journey uneventful?" Duir shook his head. "We found Hildorian's location, only visible on New Year's Day, but we ran into trouble." Sauron appeared. Elrond's face hardened. After Duir told him everything that had happened, he said slowly, "You were reckless. Sauron's power is immense. Had you not escaped when you did, you might never have returned." Duir conceded the point. He had been saved at the last by a gate key he'd managed to obtain, a narrow thread between life and death. He had been careless and fortunate in equal measure. In the infirmary, Elrond bowed in respect to the blue wizards and promised to do what he could. Romistamo, though exhausted, would recover with rest. Morinetar's case was graver. Elrond, Dewey said anxiously, can you help Morinetar? Can the corruption be removed? Elrond's answer was quiet and solemn. Some of what Sauron has left is deep. Only in Valinor might a complete cure be possible. Without the Valar's leave, that is not an option. I can, however, seal the contaminated part, contain it, prevent the dark influence from spreading further. It is a temporary measure, not a cure. If the contamination cannot be purified, there will always be the risk of falling again. Dewey breathed out in relief, at least for the containment. Romistamo seized on the hope. Elrond first healed Morinetar's battered body, returning much of his strength. Then, as bearer of Vilya, the Ring of Air, he sealed the defiled portion of Morinetar's mind, isolating the shadow Sauron had planted. In doing so, a portion of Morinetar's own power was sealed away with the corruption, and the lock would weaken the nearer he came to Sauron's presence. Morinetar bowed, eyes wet with gratitude. Lord Elrond, had you not intervened, I would have been lost. He then turned to Dewey. And you, thank you. Without you and Romistamo, I do not know what fate would have befallen us. Romistamo has already given you the Horn of Victory, but I mean to add my thanks. He spoke with burning sincerity. I have a gift for you, a golden bow crafted by a Noldor smith in Valinor, fashioned after the bow of Orome. It never misses. When I return to the east, I will see that it is yours. Dewey, curious at the promise of such a weapon, accepted gratefully. While the blue wizards recovered in Rivendell, Dewey returned to Weathertop. He went down to the cellar vault, where Smaug lay half buried in a mountain of hoarded gold. The dragon lifted his head and snuffled at Dewey with obvious pleasure. Master, you are back, Smaug rumbled, subtly shifting the treasure as if to hide it. Dewey ignored the show and said simply, Bring out my item. Smaug obliged, opening his jaws to spit up a round, black crystal. Dewey wiped the dragon's saliva away with a brief cleansing spell and took the palantir. It was not as he had left it. A faint aura of shadow clung to it, and within the glass a black mist swirled, resolving into the pale outline of Dewey's own face. It was the Horcrux, the last desperate safeguard Dewey had prepared before traveling east. He had split off a fragment of his soul and bound it to the palantir, an object so resilient that neither Aeglos nor fire would easily shatter it. The act had cost him. An orc had been killed to complete the ritual. He had entrusted the palantir to Smaug for safekeeping, a last resort should he ever face annihilation, something to anchor his life should he be destroyed outwardly. Dewey closed his eyes for a moment as the black mist stirred, then locked the palantir away. He had survived Sauron's reach this time, but the price had been steep. The road ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand caution. Chapter 232, Golden Bow and Silver Arrow. Creating a Horcrux had solved one problem for Dewey, but it had introduced others. He discovered to his dismay that tearing a sliver of his soul away had taken more than just a fragment. It had shaved off a measure of his reason. Since then, he had been uncomfortably more impulsive, more prone to reckless decisions. His ill-considered rescue of Morinetar had been proof enough. It had nearly landed him in a trap he might never have escaped. That had only been after splitting off a single fragment. The thought of dividing his soul 7 ways, as Lord Voldemort had reportedly done, made him shudder. Dewey turned the palantir, his Horcrux, over in his hands and felt the vigilance in his chest tighten. When he'd created it, he had briefly considered making more Horcruxes for extra security. The Crown of Wisdom, the Golden Goblet, the Resurrection Stone, Aeglos. Any of them could have held a piece of him. Fortunately, he had stopped himself. This would be his first and last Horcrux. He would have to learn to live with the consequences and find ways to mend what he had broken. There were only a few options. The easiest stopgap was soul stabilizers, a class of advanced potions that eased the tremors and agony of a damaged soul and kept the mind steady after great spiritual trauma. In the darker chronicles, Voldemort had relied on them, ordering Snape to brew him constant supplies. They were effective, but temporary, a painkiller in potion form that masked the damage rather than curing it. The only true cure was reintegration, reuniting the severed fragments with the original soul. That required rare magic and, more importantly, genuine, heartfelt repentance. The ritual itself was excruciating. Who willingly endured that if their whole purpose in ripping their soul apart had been to anchor themselves on piece by piece? Dewey could not imagine offering such contrition for killing the orc whose death had anchored his Horcrux. The condition was simply too severe to contemplate. There was a third, slower path, meditation. His particular method of meditation strengthened the mind and over many years could help repair soul wounds. But Dewey estimated the process would take more than a decade to make a meaningful difference. For now, he resolved to do all three: meditate long-term and use soul stabilizers to keep his reason intact in the short term. Soul stabilizers were fiendishly difficult to brew, and many needed ingredients were absent from this world. Dewey spent 2 months hunting replacements and experimenting. Radagast and Elrond aided him in locating suitable substitutes, and at last they produced a batch of a silvery potion that tasted like cool metal and ran through him like cold clarity. One small bottle chased away the dull ache and the jittery restlessness. His thoughts became sharp again, the impulsivity damped, but it was only temporary. One bottle lasted a month, and the batch they had made would carry him for only 3 months. He would need to keep producing them, or find another solution, before he could safely risk the consequences of his split soul. Time, however, pressed. The year was ending. Hildorian, the birthplace of men, would reappear at the first light of the new year, and Dewey had to reach it in time to enter the Valley of Slumber. The schedule left little room for potion making. Plans were made to cover for him. Once Romestamo had confirmed that his friend was safe, the Blue Wizard used one of Dewey's portkeys to return early to the Far East, ensuring that Sauron's forces could not exploit his absence. Morinitar, restless even after a period of recovery in Rivendell, ignored Elrond's pleas and set off for the east as well. Because his staff had been taken, Elrond and Dewey gave Morinitar the staff they had seized from Saruman. It was awkward. Morinitar did not find Saruman's staff entirely comfortable, yet it was better than going unarmed. In a strange twist, the two staffs had swapped owners. Morinitar's was now in Saruman's hands, and Saruman's in Morinitar's. After tying up affairs at Weathertop and Isengard, and taking his leave from Arwen and Elrond, Dewey touched the silver brooch at his breast and vanished. He reappeared in the Far East, on a mountainside where two familiar figures waited with warm smiles. "Duir, welcome to the East." Romestamo and Morinitar greeted him. Behind them stood a wooden cabin tucked into a hilly range on the southern shore of the Sea of Rune. Nearby grazed a small herd of Araw wild oxen, descendants of Aroma's cattle, one of which served as Romestamo's mount. Their horns were dangerous, their speed formidable. Long ago, the Easterling warlords had sought their females to breed powerful warriors. Romestamo insisted Dewey rest and offered a draught of Araw wild ox milk. The milk had a mild enchantment. With regular use, it increased physical strength. Dewey, who had already benefited from ent draughts and whose physique was now almost elf-like, felt only a subtle change after a single drink. If he could arrange to raise a few Araw oxen at Isengard, however, the long-term gains would be considerable. While Dewey drank, Morinitar kept a promise. He presented a golden bow to Dewey. It looked as if hammered from gold, yet it flexed with impossible resilience. Intricate patterns and runes danced along its limb. Accompanying it were 3 silver arrows. "The bowstring is woven from a tree from Valinor," Morinitar explained, "and the string itself is braided from the tail hair of Avala's steed. The 3 arrows are the only silver ones left." He told the tale. Originally, the bow had 12 silver arrows. They had used one to fell an orc leader in the Misty Mountains, another to kill a tyrant of the Easterlings in the east, and 7 more over the course of battles against Mordor. Only 3 remained. These silver arrows, paired with the golden bow, require no sight to find their target, Morinitar said. They fly true every time. If your will is strong enough, they can strike across 1,000 miles. They are faster than the wind. By the time a man blinks, they've already passed. Dewey's eyes shone. A weapon that guaranteed a hit, even at extreme range, was a rare and dangerous thing. He would have liked nothing more than to let one fly straight toward Mordor. Short of that, it would be invaluable in the field. The bow could also use ordinary arrows, less miraculous at range, but still unnervingly accurate. Dewey accepted the gift, and in return, pressed 2 sapphire brooches into their hands. The brooches were portkeys. Tap 3 times in an emergency, and they would transport the holder instantly to Isengard. The blue wizards appreciated a gift that could save their lives. He lingered only briefly. After farewells and a last cup of milk, Dewey set out eastward again. He had to reach Hildorian before the New Year's first light and enter the Valley of Slumber. Behind him, Romestamo and Morinetar turned back to their work. The Easterling tribes loyal to Sauron were stirring, apparently receiving orders from Mordor, and their mobilization suggested an attempt to reclaim the whole eastern region. The Blue Wizards would marshal resistance and try to blunt whatever storm Mordor intended to send. Chapter 233, Birthplace of Mankind. Trouble was stirring in the Easterlings' lands, but Dewey had neither the time nor the appetite to look into it. He rode his broom eastward, casting a disillusionment charm over himself and the broom so he wouldn't be noticed. In that guise, he crossed the great Orocarni Mountains, the largest range in the far east. The western slopes of the Orocarni were clothed in the savage forest, once said to shelter Cuivienen, the legendary birthplace of the Elves, where a mountain river and waterfall poured into the Cuivienen Bay of the Helcar Sea. The Elves first awoke there, and later divided into groups, Vanyar, Noldor, Teleri. But the world has changed so much since then, coastlines reshaped, rivers rerouted, mountains altered, that Cuivienen no longer existed as it had. Dwarves dotted the range as well. 4 of the 7 dwarf houses trace their origins to these peaks. The eastern dwarves had their awakenings here. Yet under Sauron's long shadow in the east, some were twisted into dark dwarves, loyal to him and constantly at odds with the mountain dwarves over territory. The 2 blue wizards, Romestamo and Morinetar, had traveled the region, allying with mountain dwarf eastern elves and some men to form a bulwark against Sauron's complete domination of the east. Dewey kept on. Following the route map Romestamo had given him, he flew further east until, on the day before the new year, he reached the continent's easternmost tip. He faced the boundless sea and the rising sun, looking down at a coastline that felt untouched. Green hills, clear waters, a quietness that suggested Sauron's reach had not extended this far. Perhaps it was the shelter of the Orocarni to the west, or simply how remote the place was, but this coast seemed like a land apart. People lived here too, men who resembled the Easterners of Dewey's memory more than the Easterlings did. He deliberately made no scene among them, and guided by the map, approached a continuous, steep mountain range along the shore. The peaks formed a semi-arc, like a tall wall enclosing a crown of higher summits. Moist winds from the eastern sea were trapped here, forming a constant veil of mist that made the range appear all the more mysterious. Only when the sun's strong wind from the east cleared the fog for an instant did the mountains reveal their true outline. It was hence they were called the Mountains of Wind, and here the map ended. Tomorrow, at the first light of the new year, striking the Mountains of Wind, Hildorian would reveal itself, and the slumbering valley where men first awoke could be entered. Curious if magic could locate Hildorian, Dewey muttered, "Show me the way," and sent a golden beam from his hand into the mist-choked mountains. He followed the light, plowing through fog so thick he could not see his own hand. He used a whirlwind to part the mist. It worked for a brief moment before the inexhaustible fog closed in again. He cast one spell after another, even summoning a small tornado, but the mist was endless and the enchantments could not disperse it. Eventually, he realized his guiding light had been interfered with. Something in those mountains was suppressing not only sight and sense, but magic itself. He searched the canyons methodically all day and missed nothing, yet Hildorian remained hidden. Resigned, he waited until morning. At the foot of the range, he set up a small tent, unremarkable from the outside, but inside he had installed an undetectable extension charm. The interior rose 3 stories high with a living room, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and every amenity. He cast a muggle-repelling charm and a shielding charm around it and sank into meditation. His goal now was twofold, to grow stronger and to mend the missing fragments of his soul. He slept in meditation until dawn. When he opened his eyes, the sea to the east had a thin glow on its edge. The sun would rise soon. It was the first day of the new year, and in the wider world, it was now the year 2946 of the Third Age. Dewey had been in Middle-earth for 5 years. He folded the tent into his spatial bag, breathed the clean mountain air, and waited for the sun. As the first shy ray struck the mountains of wind, the sudden eastern breeze scattered the mist. The range seemed to stir under the light, as if a gray veil were being lifted. Over a canyon, an arc of rainbow formed, an archway of color. Dewey's heart lifted. He flew straight for it and landed in the canyon below. Yesterday, this place had been ordinary. Today, beneath the rainbow, a faint, mirage-like scene shimmered into being. As he stepped closer, a clear breeze carrying a sweet, calming scent washed over him. The aroma settled into his bones, easing his spirit, making him feel as safe as if he had returned to his mother's womb. He took another step into the mirage and was in a different world. He stood in a vivid valley ringed by mountain walls. The air was thick with a honeyed perfume. Nightingales sang from every thicket. It was always spring here, trees heavy with sweet fruit, flowers in bloom everywhere. A silver river ran through the valley, its bed glittering as if washed with gold dust, jade and agate. Everything felt untouched by age, from the rocks to the water, an almost palpable freshness hummed with a dense, sacred magic. Dewey approached an apple tree, plucked a bright red fruit, and bit into it. Sweet juice flooded his mouth, and a thread of holy energy threaded into him. A deep, indescribable comfort spread through his spirit, soothing a place in his soul that had long lain raw. He ate more, unable to stop until he was full, and marveled at the miracle. The fruit's power made the place where part of his soul had been missing show the faintest sign of regrowth. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible healing, but tangible. He had expected years of slow repair through meditation. Here in Hildorian, the process leapt forward with every bite. He learned why. This was Hildorian, the birthplace of men. Iluvatar himself had hidden it during the years of the lamps and the 2 trees, so that men might be left undisturbed. Even the Valar could not find it. It only began to show to the world at the end of the years of the 2 trees, when the sun rose from the west. The valley was saturated with Iluvatar's lingering divine power. Its fruit trees were grown by that power to nourish the newly awakened men. The fruits therefore carried a sacred attribute that ordinary trees could not match. Dewey stood among the trees and felt a swell of gratitude and wonder at Iluvatar's design. The valley's magic was richer even than Rivendell or Lothlorien. The place had the certainty of youth and sanctity. For a moment he daydreamed of making it his hidden retreat, if only it weren't so far from Weathertop. But he had a task. After the feast of fruit, he let it settle in his stomach and walked deeper into the valley. The innermost hollow, where men had first awakened, still lay ahead. There he hoped to find the last ingredient he needed for the Philosopher's Stone, the salt of flesh. Chapter 234, Silent. The deeper Dewey went into the valley, the more the place revealed itself as something almost holy. It lived up to its reputation as the site Iluvatar had set aside for the awakening of mankind. Though Dewey had never seen Valinor in the west, he felt the valley could easily rival it. At the valley's heart lay a crystalline lake rimmed with golden sand and scattered with multicolored gems. If Smaug had been here, Dewey thought with a faint smile, the dragon would have roared with delight. Set into the ring of cliffs around the lake were man-made caverns, ruins left by the first people who had woken here. Despite the ages, the sacred power that lingered over the place had protected it from decay. The caves looked as if someone had only just walked away. Dewey explored the ruins, but found nothing directly useful. He was here for one thing, the salt of flesh, the third principal ingredient for the Philosopher's Stone. He already had the other 2. From Loon Bay at the Grey Havens, he had collected the spirit mercury, the accumulated mental power of the elves, and from the paths of the dead he had gathered soul sulfur, the soul stuff harvested from the tears of the dead. Elrond had told him that the salt of flesh didn't mean ordinary salt or merely the body. It was an active, life-bearing substance, a kind of stabilizing vitality, but it was nowhere obvious. He turned his attention to the lake, thinking the answer might be in its waters. The water was immaculate, sweet and cool. A sip erased fatigue and refreshed him. It was wondrous, but not what he sought. He sat on the grass by the shore, puzzling, until something in his fingers brought the idea into focus. Soil. He'd brushed his hand over the turf and picked up damp earth, and suddenly he remembered the myths from his previous life, the stories where humankind were shaped from clay. Even in the lore of Arda, the bodies of men formed in Hildorian, the land itself giving rise to their flesh. It wasn't literal shaping from mud, but the connection was unmistakable. He dug up a clump of earth. It was rich, moist, and humming with vitality. The realization came clear. The valley's soil, especially by the lake where the first humans had awakened, was saturated with that living principle. That was the salt of flesh. Extracting it, however, would be difficult. Dewey set up a tent beside the lake and set to work. He dug, sieved, and poured fertile loam into a mithril crucible, added lake water, and mixed it into a slurry. From his pouch, he produced a bottle of separating potion, let 3 drops fall into the mixture, and stirred until the agent integrated. He let the blend settle. Under the action of the reagent, the living components dissolved into the water, while heavier grit sank to the bottom. When the muddy residue had settled, he poured the clearer solution through a golden filter, cleaned the crucible, returned the clear liquid, and heated it gently. He stirred with his wand as the water steamed away. When the moisture vanished, a pale crust remained, salt-like crystals that pulsed faintly with life. He scraped them up and stored them in a transparent crystal phial. One small shard on his tongue tasted of salt and unleashed a rush of vitality through his limbs, not brute strength like an ent draught, but a deep fortifying of life force, the kind that lengthened life. A single grain's effect was trivial, perhaps only a moment of added span, but genuine. He wanted to devour the whole supply, but he forced himself to think of the philosopher's stone. The salt of flesh would be finite, no matter how much he harvested. The stone promised something else entirely. Discipline won out. He paused to eat some of the valley's fruit. The area was abundant with restorative produce that also aided the soul. As he settled into the work, a system prompt blinked across his mind. Hogwarts Sign-in System, location Hildorian. Sign in? Dewey's eyes brightened. Sign in, he answered. Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining the obscurial talent. The message hit him like a cold splash. Obscurials, born of suppressed magic that spawned an obscurus within, were a cursed rarity. The obscurus was a living wound of magic that usually blighted and shortened its host's life. The rare adult who survived it, like Credence, still died young. Receiving the talent felt less like a blessing and more like a threat. He checked himself carefully. There was no sudden wound, no visible obscurus inside him. What he did notice, surprisingly, was that his magical growth had accelerated. Magic in his body was increasing even without meditation, faster than when he had first awakened. If he actively practiced, the growth seemed to double. He should have been ecstatic, but the specter of an obscurus, an uncontrollable, life-eating force, tempered his joy. For now, all he could perceive was his rising power. The obscurus itself did not manifest. After that, he threw himself into the extraction. Days blurred into weeks. He ate the valley's fruit when hungry, and drank its water when thirsty. In a month, he had processed the soil around the lake dry. 1 bottle of Blanc crystal sat in his pack. However, beyond the lakeshore, the soil's living content thinned quickly. Only the ground immediately touched by the place of awakening held that intensity. Dewey realized that if he kept stripping the earth, he would wreck the valley. The soil he'd taken had become ordinary dirt, no longer capable of supporting those evergreen blossoms and ancient trees. Hildorian's sacredness was a fragile residue of Iluvatar's gift. If he exhausted it, the valley would lose what made it special. He stopped. He repaired what he could with magic and restored the tilled ground's surface. He decided not to plunder the rest. Instead, Dewey renovated the ancient caves. Taking cues from dwarf architecture and elven aesthetics, he refitted them into simple, elegant quarters and built a fireplace. He had worried the valley's lingering sanctity might block a flue connection, but the fireplace linked cleanly with both Weathertop and Isengard. He made one more convenience. He enchanted an old apple tree to serve as a repeatable portkey, to be paired later with the white tree or the melon tree back at Weathertop. The procedure was ceremonial. Circle the trunk 3 times left, 3 times right, pat the bark, and shout, "Open," and the 2 trees would transport one to the other. 3 months had passed since his arrival. He had eaten many of the valley's fruits, preserved the remainder with spells, and prepared to take them with him. The fruits had done more than nourish. Their sacred energies were mending the wounds to his soul caused by his Horcrux work. The sharp side effects, impulsiveness, fractured reason, had eased. He could think clearly again without soul-stabilizing potions. If he finished the fruits, he dared to believe his soul might be made whole once more. Satisfied the valley would survive, Dewey made his preparations to leave. He sprinkled a handful of flue powder into the fireplace and called, "Isengard!" Green flames leapt up, enveloping him, and he vanished from the lakeside. Chapter 235, Frost Dragon. Far to the north of the Grey Mountains, beyond the Lonely Mountain, the land became an unbroken hell of ice and snow. Few ever set foot there. It was a place of endless winter. Yet on this day, a single figure arrived. Saruman rode a fell beast, cutting a dark wedge through the blizzard as they flew deeper into the frozen wastes. Ice crusted the fell beast's wings. Frost rimed Saruman's eyebrows and beard. His thin robe whipped about his gaunt frame, but he appeared untouched by the cold. His keen eyes pierced the flurries, fixed on a great nameless snowbound peak ahead. At the mountain's foot, the fell beast grew uneasy, shuddering as if it smelled something vast and terrible. "Quiet, beast," Saruman snapped, but the animal resisted. Saruman's face hardened. His voice took on a tone of command threaded with power. "Land on the mountain." The fell beast stiffened and then, as if compelled, descended and set him down among the drifts. Saruman ignored its trembling and pressed onward, staff in hand. The mountain's chill was more bitter than even the northern wastes. Here the snow never melted. Even in the warmest summers, the peak remained an ice-bound fortress. He moved single-mindedly through the drifts until he came upon an immense glacial fissure. A gale of cold blew from that opening, turning his breath to fine white mist. Frost thickened on his beard and brows, and a crimson flush marked his cheeks, but he did not hesitate. The fissure widened as he went deeper, the air growing thinner, the cold keener. Even he felt the strain, and only the faint warmth at the tip of his staff kept the bite from freezing him outright. At the end of the cavern he found the source of the wind, a dragon's head, colossal beyond imagining, sleeping under that frozen dome. Even Saruman could see only the head. A single scale on that head would dwarf a man. Black as storm clouds, the dragon exhaled, and the gusts became hurricanes of cold that swept the mountain. This was no ordinary worm. Ancient power radiated from it. Long ago, Morgoth had made dragons as instruments of dominion, wingless dragons that lumbered on 4 legs, winged dragons of 2 or 4 legs, dragons that breathed flame, and others that exhaled deathly cold. In the memory of Middle-earth, Smaug was a mighty 4-legged, 2-winged fire drake, but he was small beside the primeval beasts. Morgoth's earliest creations were titans, Glaurung, the wingless worm whose ruinous fires broke the kingdoms of the First Age, and Ancalagon the Black, a winged terror whose death rent the very Thangorodrim. There were other rarer forms too, serpentine-crawling dragons, thunder dragons that hurled lightning, light dragons that seared with deadly rays, and ice dragons that exhaled frost. These exceptional breeds often left few descendants and few witnesses to their deeds. The sleeper before Saruman, however, was one of the rarest, a frost dragon, a survivor of the old wars who had escaped death in the War of Wrath. Sensing the presence of the Maya, the giant eyes opened, black and cavernous, cold as voids. The voice that came from that huge mouth carried the old world's malice. "Who wakes Glaurung?" Saruman did not flinch. "I am Saruman, the white, no, the many-colored wizard. I have come to speak with you, the eldest of dragons." The dragon's gaze fixed on the small, stooping figure like a distant insect. "A wizard," it rumbled, suspicion in every syllable. "I smell the Valar's touch upon you. You hide a west wind in your shape, but your ruse will not hold." It readied an attack, a blast of cold that could freeze thought. Saruman tightened his grip on his staff and braced, but quickly spoke, urgency in his voice. "No, hear me first. I come on Sauron's behalf. We seek an alliance." "Sauron?" The dragon hesitated, eyeing him. Saruman nodded and explained with measured words. "You have slept far from the news of the world. Sauron has taken up Morgoth's legacy in the east. He rules much of the eastern lands and now prepares to press westward. The free peoples have united against him, aided by wizards and emissaries from the west. We would have your power, your winter fall upon the west. If you join us, we will give you the northern reaches as your domain and half the spoils of the world's wealth. Glaurung only snorted, derision like grinding frost. My master Morgoth failed to rule all things. Does this Sauron boast he will finish my maker's work? His tone betrayed no temptation, only scorn. We answer to none but Morgoth. No spellmaker or pretender shall command us. Saruman pressed on. There is a dragon, Smaug, who has been inexplicably mastered. A black wizard named Duir has bound him and rides him. He calls himself Lord of Dragons. The ancient dragon's laughter was a cracking of old ice. Lord of Dragons? Preposterous. Only Morgoth is Lord of Dragons. A wizard claiming that title is mockery. Saruman tried another tack. Then defeat him. Smite that vaulting fire. Lend your cold breath to purge the flames. Together we could overthrow those who stand in our way. Glaurung's face clouded with memory and fury. His voice dropped as if telling an old wound. You do not know the terror of that time. When the world was sundered, mountains split, seas poured up, lands drowned, countless dragons perished. I stood in the flood when Beleriand sank. The sea rushed up like a ravenous thing and ate my kin. I was nearly swallowed, but I blew forth cold, and the seawater froze about me. I was encased, cast away by the currents, and at last I came to this far shore. Since then I have never left this peak. I swore I would sleep and never tempt the world again. Saruman, who had not been present in those ancient battles, felt a faint contempt for the dragon's fear. Yet he knew the mission was what mattered. He offered a new inducement, painting grand images of glory and dominion. When flattery and promise failed, he shifted to subtler arts. His voice thinned and deepened, threaded with a hypnotic cadence. Glaurung, eldest among dragons, Lord of Frost, do you mean to curl here until you fade, to be a forgotten relic? Join me. I will make you famous as Glaurung and Ancalagon were. Men and elves will tremble at your name. You will become winter itself. You will bring long darkness and cold across the west. All the treasures of the world can be yours. The words stroked at old griefs and old hungers. For a moment the great eyes softened, lost in the spell's pull. Saruman's voice had touched the long-buried resentments and ambitions in the dragon's heart, and the ancient creature's mental guard, weakened by solitude and memory, began to unbraid. The chance Saruman had sought opened before him. The dragon slipped toward the days of suggestion, and in that slippage he saw his dominion begin. Chapter 236, Iron Crown. Saruman's smile had just begun to widen. Glaurung was nearly under his spell. Then, in an instant, the dragon's eyes flamed with resistance, and it shook free of the enchantment. You tempt death, it roared. The glaciers around them shuddered as the beast thrashed, sending slabs of ice tumbling down. Glaurung opened its maw and unleashed a blast of breath so cold the air itself seemed to freeze. Saruman's face went pale. He threw up a ward with his staff, but the frigid gale clung to the shimmering shield, frosting and thickening until the barriers began to spider with cracks. Realizing he could not hold, Saruman fled deeper into the glacier fissures. Glaurung, roused and furious at having been meddled with after its long slumber, surged after him. The mountain itself groaned, ice fissures widened, and a massive avalanche thundered through the pass. Saruman barely escaped the collapsing glacier by summoning a fellbeast and mounting it. Above the roar of falling ice came a new, incomparably deeper thunder. A black dragon tore free of the frozen wastes, enormous, almost a kilometer in length, its shadow blotting the sky. It opened its throat and bellowed, a sound that made the mountains tremble. Glaurung spread wings the size of sea sails, beat them once, and conjured a storm that whipped snow and sleet into a blinding sheet as it set off in pursuit of Saruman and his fleeing mount. From his saddle, Saruman twisted and hurled great firebolts behind him. The flames burst on the dragon's scales and soothed no wound. Glaurung's hide shrugged them off as if they were smoke. With a single powerful stroke, the dragon closed the distance. It reared, puffed its chest, and sent a concentrated jet of freezing air toward the fellbeast and rider. Saruman pushed up a brilliant barrier that took the brunt of the blast, but the residual cold struck the fellbeast's wings and hindquarters. Within heartbeats, its membranes stiffened. The creature screamed and dropped like a stone. Saruman clung to the beast's saddle and hitched his body to it to brace the fall. He survived the plunge, but the fell beast smashed onto a jagged peak and lay dying. Saruman stumbled free, hair and robes disordered, eyes hard as he stared upward at the circling dragon. Snow and wind tore around Glaurung as it descended, vast and imperious. It looked down at the small, lone wizard and hissed with contempt. "Where will you run now, little wizard?" "I'm starving," the dragon rumbled. "You and that sorry mount will make a fine snack." Glaurung snapped up the wounded fell beast, finished it with a single savage bite, and swallowed it in a few brutal gulps. Then it fixed its gaze on Saruman and opened its maw to strike. Suddenly the dragon wavered. Dizziness swept over it. It swayed on its talons and blinked in confusion. What is this?" it muttered, uncertain and alarmed. When its eyes fell on Saruman's victorious grin, realization flared across the beast's face. "You! What have you done?" Saruman answered with a cold, triumphant tone. "I hid a vial in my mount. Not ordinary poison, a drop of Ungoliant's venom." Ungoliant, the ancient spider spirit from the dark before the world, had power the like of which rivaled Morgoth's. In ages past she had conspired with Morgoth, drank the sap of the two trees, and injected them with a venom that unmade the light itself. If the sap of the trees could be withered by her touch, then an aged dragon was no match at all. At the mention of Ungoliant, alarm and fury contorted Glaurung's features. It belched another blast of cold that should have frozen Saruman solid, but the venom worked quickly. Strength fled the dragon's limbs, its knees buckled, and it collapsed, eyes burning with impotent rage. Saruman lowered his shield and approached the fallen colossus, a predator scenting victory. If he could bend this dragon entirely to his will, the power it would grant him was enormous, greater than any army of Uruk-hai. Yet even as the thought tempted him, the presence of Sauron loomed and tempered his greed. Both were Maiar, but Sauron's power dwarfed his own. Saruman was a servant now in name and had to be cautious. Reluctantly, he produced from his sleeve an iron circlet. Under Glaurung's widened, unwilling eyes, he pressed it to the dragon's brow. The crown sank as though it took root. It swelled and forged itself to the head of the dragon, becoming a massive circlet of black iron, radiating a chill and an authority that dimmed the very air. This was no ordinary crown. It was Morgoth's iron crown, once set with 3 Silmarils when he laid waste to the 2 trees. Those jewels had been wrested away in the long, tragic wars that followed. The crown itself had passed through ages of ruin and reforging. Sauron had reclaimed and reshaped it, and now he had lent its menace through Saruman. The moment the crown ceded, Sauron's will poured through it like a tide. The dragon's mental resistance, already weakened by the venom, crumbled. A black veil crept into Glaurung's eyes. Sauron's shadow blinked from his pupils, and the beast became a puppet. Mobility returned to its limbs, but its mind was no longer its own. When the dragon spoke, it was Sauron's voice that resonated through that vast throat. "You have served me well, Saruman," the voice intoned. "When you return, I will allow you to reforge a ring of power on Mount Doom." At those words, Saruman's face lit with avarice. Mount Doom was fire and malice incarnate. To forge a ring, there would mean a ring of extraordinary potency. He had always hungered for power, and to be permitted to shape such a weapon, even if he dared not ask for the One Ring itself, was a promise that set his mind racing with possibility. Without another hesitation, he climbed the dragon's flank. Glaurung obeyed, folded those enormous wings, and launched southward, blotting the heavens as it went. The ice dragon moved like a living winter, drawing the cold with it. Beneath its broad sweep, the skies dimmed. A chill descended across the lands. It passed east of the Grey Mountains, between the Lonely Mountain and the Iron Hills, skirting Mirkwood as it bore Saruman away to Mordor. Hidden among the clouds, its passage went unseen. Dwarves in the Lonely Mountain and Iron Hills felt only a sudden pall of cold and a momentary dimming of the sky, and could make nothing of it. Thranduil of Mirkwood and Galadriel in Lothlorien both furrowed their brows and turned their gazes eastward at an uneasy premonition, but the exact nature of what passed them remained obscure. Far to the west, Duir remained unaware of these events for the time being. He returned to Isengard to confirm the security of his holdings and to reward the Griffons and Hellhounds that patrolled Orthanc. After ensuring all was as it should be, he rode out again into the back ranges of the Misty Mountains to the dragon breeding farm he had founded. That farm lay in a pocket of magic, sealed and obscured from the world, as if wrapped in a private enchantment. From the outside, or even from the air, the great hollow in the forest could not be detected. Within its hidden glades, dozens of subdragons had taken up residence. The largest measured some dozen meters or more, nowhere near the titanic size of Smaug, but still formidable. Their scales turned ordinary steel, and their flames could liquefy iron. They were brutish in mind and temper, incapable of human speech and prone to savagery. Taming them would have been a task for a warrior or a mage. Dewey had solved that problem simply by leaving them to Smaug. By blood and by terror, the great dragon commanded them. At the sight of Smaug, the youngsters fell huskily silent. Any that chafed at his rule found themselves tormented until they bowed their heads. Smaug needed little effort to keep them in line. An annual visit to remind them of his authority was enough to keep the brood obedient and his dominion unchallenged. Chapter 237, Making the Philosopher's Stone. Aside from the subdragons, the dragon farm was crowded with cattle, sheep, and horses, and more than a dozen wargs and orcs who had fallen into Dewey's hands. The livestock fed the subdragons. The wargs and orcs, bound by Imperio, tended the herds and cared for the young dragons. If a subdragon occasionally ate one of them, Dewey felt no remorse. The Misty Mountains teemed with wargs and orcs, and he could always snare more. When Dewey arrived at the farm, he went straight to the first subdragon born there. It was a hybrid, Smaug's blood mixed with a giant lizard's body. Black scales, yellow eyes, bronze horns, and a spiny tail, more like a giant winged lizard. Subdragons grew incredibly fast. Within a week, they more than triple in size. In a month, they could be the size of a small house, and by 1 year, they could fly and stretch over 10 meters. This one, christened Number 1, had just taken down a wild ox. Its teeth sank into the ox's neck and killed it with a single bite. The herd scattered in panic. Number 1 didn't immediately devour the carcass. It breathed flame over the ox until the scent of roasted meat rose, and only then began to eat. Dewey watched with interest and walked closer. The subdragon growled a warning and ready to flame, but Dewey ignored it. He hadn't bound the subdragons with magic contracts. He relied on Smaug's presence and dominance to keep them in check. He was breeding them for their parts: dragon liver for potions, scales for defensive crafting, blood for alchemical uses, hide for armor. He deliberately avoided emotional bonds. If he grew attached, he wouldn't be able to harvest them later. Number 1 took Dewey's approach as a challenge and opened its jaws to breathe. Imperio, Dewey snapped, and the word hit the creature like a leash. Subdragons, despite their physical power, amplified by Smaug's blood, had a relative weakness in mental resistance. Ordinary spells like Stupefy or Petrificus Totalis did little to them, but their psychic defenses were weaker than their bodies, and Imperio worked. Number 1 froze, subdued. Dewey produced a sharp mithril needle and a large syringe, thrust it through a gap in the scales, and began drawing blood. He filled a bucket before releasing the subdragon. One by one, he did the same to the others, treating their dragon blood as if it were a common commodity. By the time he finished, the subdragons were visibly pallid, and Dewey ordered the orcs to bring more cattle and sheep so the young dragons could replenish themselves. With the collected dragon blood loaded, Dewey left the farm and returned to Weathertop, to the alchemy room at Hogwarts Castle. Laid out before him were the 3 primal essences: mercury of the spirit, soul sulfur, and salt of flesh, alongside the freshly drawn dragon blood. These, together with the 4 classical elements, were the ingredients for the Philosopher's Stone. A mithril furnace stood ready, and a double-necked sealed glass flask, engraved with runes to prevent energy leakage, waited to contain the reaction. For wind, water, and fire, Dewey could rely on the 3 elven rings and the cooperation of Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf to gather the elemental forces. For earth, he opened another box and revealed the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, glittering with earth's essence. With that, the 4 elements were complete. He unrolled a scroll of astronomical charts he had salvaged from Saruman's library. The scroll recorded Middle-earth's celestial phenomena and let him calculate the precise alignments he would need. Making a philosopher's stone was not merely an exercise in materials. It required exact timing of celestial events, specific incantations, carefully drawn magic circles, and patience. Nicholas Flamel had taken 21 years to produce his stone, but most of that time was spent finding and extracting the three primal essences. Flamel's notes in the Book of Abraham described how, during the Black Death, he harvested vast quantities of the mental energy, soul force, and life essence of plague victims to distill mercury of the spirit, soul sulfur, and salt of flesh. The process was repetitive, gruesome, and time-consuming. One reason why Flamel's achievement was unique and nearly impossible to duplicate. Dewey had advantages Flamel never had. The Book of Abraham Dewey owned already contained Flamel's interpretations. Elrond had pointed him to the locations of the three primal essences. The Elves' rings could coax elements directly, and places such as Loon Bay, the Paths of the Dead, and Hildorian were available to gather what Flamel had to seek for years. Those advantages eliminated much of the time-consuming collection, but the alchemical work itself was still delicate. A single mistake would waste the essences and ruin years of effort. Weather and the clarity of the skies mattered. If clouds hid the stars at a critical moment, the ritual could fail. Dewey double-checked his astronomical calculations in Rivendell with Elrond's help and used Galadriel's mirror to forecast the weather, leaving nothing to chance. At last, with preparations complete, Dewey began. He measured the mercury of the spirit, soul sulfur, and salt of flesh into the double-necked flask in a strict 1:1:1 ratio and sealed it. The silvery mercury, the yellow sulfur, and the white salt swirled together into a trinity that shimmered with three colors as a mysterious reaction began. Dewey used dragon blood as fuel, turning it into a fierce blood-red flame beneath the mithril furnace to accelerate the reaction. According to the Book of Abraham, the dragon blood fire needed to burn continuously for 49 days. He had prepared more than a dozen buckets, not enough for a dragon's lifetime, but sufficient for the ritual. Dewey tended the furnace day after day. He fed the dragon blood, regulated the heat so it never burned too hot or too low, ate fruits from Hildorian when hunger struck, and drank from a golden cup. He meditated constantly, extending his mind to perceive the subtle changes in the substance in the flask. In his inner vision, it was like watching a miniature cosmos evolve, the three essences braided together, forming a triangular circulation that encompassed spirit, soul, and flesh. Dewey watched with the calm of a detached observer, but the experience changed him. His mental power expanded rapidly. The mental castle he had been building in his mind grew larger and more solid, slowly resolving into something like a complete Hogwarts in miniature. On the 21st day, the contents of the flask completed a major transformation. The three primal essences had merged into a black, viscous mass. The flask belched a foul odor and black smoke. The substance looked carbonized and ruined. But Dewey did not panic. The Book of Abraham called this the crow's head stage, the blackening. Reaching this state meant the first phase of the stone's creation had succeeded. The next challenge would be the white rose stage, to purify and sublimate the blackened matter and extract the primary white stone. Chapter 238, Dragon of Mordor. Having completed the first stage of the Philosopher's Stone, Duir paused. To turn the black stone into a white one, he still needed a catalyst, the moment when Elenmir, Mercury, would appear in the sky. In Middle-earth, Elenmir shows itself 3 times a year, but not at fixed dates. Duir had only been able to pin down this year's first appearance by consulting the astronomical scrolls stored in Orthanc and asking Elrond for guidance. Elrond estimated it would arrive on March 8th, very soon. Before the dawn of that day, Duir traveled to Lothlorien by way of the fireplaces to seek Lady Galadriel's aid. The second stage of refining the stone required the power of the Ring of Water in her keeping. Galadriel had known for some time of Duir's experiment. When he asked for help, she agreed without hesitation. As a member of the White Council, she would not refuse, and the matter touched Arwen's future as well. Galadriel would not see her own granddaughter abandon immortality the way Luthien had. So she went with Duir to Orthanc, and Arwen accompanied her. Orthanc, reshaped by Saruman into a wizard's tower capable of amplifying magic, was the ideal place for the experiment. On the tower's highest platform, Galadriel and Arwen stood at the edge, watching quietly. Duir, meanwhile, traced a seven-pointed star array on the stone with dragon's blood, an anchor to prevent the transmutation array's energy from leaking away. Elenmere is unlike the other stars. It rises at dawn and dusk, not at midnight. On the morning of March 8th, before the sun, Elenmere climbed the eastern sky in a dazzling flare, arriving ahead of the light. As its starlight struck Orthanc, Duir triggered the seven-pointed array. At the same time, Galadriel raised her right hand, and Nenya, the ring of water, shone forth. Water from earth and sky answered her summons, coalescing into a pale blue elemental torrent that flowed into the star array. The mercury above, as if sensing the convergence, sent a single blue pillar of starlight plunging into the array, an almost physical shaft of radiance descending from the heavens. Far away, above the lonely mountain, King Thorin Oakenshield and his retinue watched the pillar of light to the southwest. "What place is that?" Thorin asked. "Near Isengard, your majesty," a dwarf answered. "It was Saruman's. Now it belongs to Duir." Thorin's face tightened as he stared at the sky-piercing column. He remained silent for a long moment. In the great greenwood of Mirkwood, father and son, Thranduil and Legolas, were watching the same light. With the giant spiders gone, the woodland realm had reclaimed the forest and repaired the old roads, reopening links across the land. Legolas looked south, admiration in his eyes. "Duir is drawing in the starlight," he murmured. "He drew in Lumbar and Sirius before. Now he draws Elenmere." The elves had awakened beneath the stars. Their reverence for the heavens was instinctive. Thranduil regarded the pillar with a mixture of awe and calculation. "Duir is no ordinary man," he said. "I cannot gauge his final fate, but it will not be small. Legolas, keep him as a friend. It will benefit you and the woodland realm." Legolas bristled at the implication that friendships should be measured in gain. He drew a wand from his belt and, with a flick, conjured a Patronus, a great silver elk with vast palmate antlers. It moved through the trees like a living light and came to nuzzle him. Legolas stroked it and spoke earnestly. "Father, Duir is my friend. Whether he becomes great or stays small won't change that. He taught me this Patronus charm. It embodies my will to protect the woodland realm, you, our kin, and my friends. If my protection were bought and sold, my spirit would fail and the Patronus would leave me. I will not become someone who only seeks advantage. Just as your love for mother is constant, so is my friendship, sincere and steadfast." Thranduil looked from his son to the noble elk and felt something like relief. He laid a hand on Legolas's shoulder. "You have grown, Legolas. Perhaps our old ways do not always fit. Do things your own way." Legolas answered with a bright, untouched smile. Unlike the reactions at the Lonely Mountain and in Mirkwood, in Mordor the Pillar of Starlight provoked wrath. From the summit of Barad-dûr Sauron trained his giant, flaming eye on Isengard and reached for the Palantir, trying to peer into the place. Galadriel, standing on Orthanc, detected that probing at once. Bolstered by the Elenmere light pouring into the array, she erupted in a holy radiance. Her pupils seemed to shine with starlight. She fixed her gaze across the distance, her power forming an invisible cage that met the eye's intrusion. "Sauron," she declared, her voice like judgment, "servant of Morgoth, this place is not for your sight. Your vision cannot pierce here." Across miles, the eye convulsed as if struck. Its probing was cut off. "Saruman!" A voice from Barad-dûr snarled, full of hate and wounded pride. Saruman, watching the pillar of light, scowled with jealousy. That had been his sphere. Now others used his tower, and he was displaced. The bitterness simmered in him. "Soon," he hissed, "I will reclaim Isengard, Duir, Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond. Soon you will know my wrath." He turned from the light to his workbench and stared at the rows of eggs that lay before him. Dozens more sat in nests and trays. Hybrids he had engineered, strange crosses of dragons, fell beasts, giant lizards, and titan pythons. Even before hatching, they radiated malevolence. Saruman had taken Sauron's technique of implanting dark spirits into creatures. Wargs had been bound this way, and he had done the same to these eggs. When they hatched, the beasts would be stronger and utterly controlled by the dark power. As their creator, Saruman expected to hold near-complete command of them, second only to Sauron. "Saruman," Sauron's shadow demanded in the laboratory, "how long until these eggs hatch and are battle-ready?" Saruman's confidence returned. "A few months to hatch, my lord. They grow fast. In 3 years they will be adult and ready. Then we will field dragons." Sauron's patience, however, was thin. "Not soon enough. Breed more. I want a dragon host to sweep everything before it, and I want it sooner." A surge of evil flowed from Sauron and into the eggs. Shadows quickened. The dark magic within them intensified. Time itself seemed to accelerate around the nests. Shells cracked, and creatures tore free. The first to emerge were the hybrids of dragons and fellbeasts, formidable, nearly equal to true dragons. Sleek and black, they lacked true dragon scales, but had the fellbeast's bat-like wings and 2 hind limbs. They could not breathe the frost of Glaurung, but they had inherited a terrifying sonic attack, a powerful shriek that induced dizziness and fear. These creatures were swift and ravenous, a terrifying combination of flight and sound. Next came the winged lizards, hybrids of dragons and the dark giant lizards of Mordor. 4-legged and winged, they resembled monstrous, flying reptiles. They could not chill foes with breath, but their bite carried a potent venom. A fang could sap strength and bring death. These were subcold dragons, deadly through poison and physical might. Finally, the largest of the brood slithered free, serpentine hybrids of dragons and titan pythons. Legless and immense, their spines bristled with sharp, ridged spikes that ran down to their tails. Covered in rough, dragon-like scales, they lacked wings, venom, and breath weapons. They struck with sheer mass and crushing power. Among Saruman's creations, these were the longest and bulkiest, terrible, living battering rams. All were steeped in darkness, and all bore spirits that would answer Sauron's will. As they shook themselves and tasted the air of Mordor, their hatching marked the beginning of a new and terrible breed of war beasts. Something neither wholly dragon nor wholly of the free people's legends, but forged in the shadow and servant to the dark. Chapter 239, Soul Transformation. Sauron and Saruman were a little disappointed that the newly hatched dragons had not inherited Glaurung's ice power. Still, with more than 100 hatchlings, they were pleased by the numbers alone. Worse yet for their enemies, these were dark dragons, their bodies inhabited by evil spirits, making them smarter and more dangerous than ordinary dragons. They could follow complex orders, think and plan to a degree, and cooperate with one another. The evil in their eyes made them cunning. When they recognized Sauron as their master, they bowed in submission. Satisfied by their cleverness, Sauron nodded and turned to Saruman. "Hatch more as quickly as you can. I will use dark arts to accelerate their maturation. In less than a year, they will be ready for combat. Then we can unleash a dragon legion on Rohan and Gondor, and use it to help you take back Isengard." Saruman's face brightened at once. Reclaiming Isengard and avenging himself on Duir, Gandalf and the others had long been his obsession. But then caution returned. He frowned. "Why the hurry now? You told me before we needed to build strength slowly. Why rush an attack on Rohan and Gondor, and help me reclaim Isengard?" Saruman had always known Sauron as a patient planner. Corrupting Numenor, posing as Anatar to deceive the elves, his schemes were methodical. This sudden urgency struck him as uncharacteristic. Sauron did not hide the reason. "My target is not Rohan or Gondor," he said flatly. "It is Isengard." Saruman stared. Why Isengard? He did not believe Sauron's offer to help. Sauron was never benevolent. If the Dark Lord truly meant to help Saruman, he would have done so long ago, and he would not be so abrupt. "Because I have perceived something there that can let me reshape my form," Sauron said. "I saw only a glimpse. Galadriel took my sight when I tried to see fully. But enough. There is a treasure being formed in Orthanc, a red gem, born of starlight, with immortal power. I have a premonition it could give me a permanent body. If I possess it, I will regain my strength and be able to sense the location of the One Ring." Saruman's disbelief turned to uneasy consideration. The One Ring had indeed once restored Sauron's presence, but Sauron shook his head. "It is not the ring. It is something still being born. We must seize it, whatever the cost." As Maiar, Saruman could not dismiss such instincts entirely. He shared Sauron's resolve. If the Dark Lord believed it possible, they had to try. Atop Orthanc in Isengard, a column of starlight, Elenmere, Mercury, pierced the night like a silver pillar. It fell upon a 7-pointed star array, drawing a steady stream of stellar energy down into a mithril furnace. Dragon's blood fed the fires below. In the furnace, a double-necked flask containing a black substance sat beside a carved raven's head. With the added stellar power, the flames behaved strangely. They burned with intensity, yet chilled the air to a freezing cold. Galadriel stood by, lending her strength. She had awakened the power of Narya, the ring of water, and poured its water elements into the furnace. The black matter in the flask drank in the mingled starlight and water. Under that influence, it began to crystallize into a white powder. A faint jasmine scent slipped past the flask's seal and floated over the chamber. When Dewey inhaled that scent, he felt his soul relax, as if it had been fed. The wounds left by crafting a Horcrux, those missing pieces of spirit, began to mend. The effect was deeper than any fruit from Hildorian. It acted directly on the soul, allowing it to slowly regrow. Dewey breathed the fragrance hungrily. He took comfort in the knowledge that the seven-pointed array confined everything within it, preventing any loss of power. The appearance of Elenmere was brief, less than 2 hours, and as dawn broke, the star faded. Yet the array retained the starlight it had drawn in, and the furnace, still burning on Dragon's blood, kept merging energy into the flask. White crystals formed, and the jasmine perfume grew stronger and more insistent. Dewey felt his soul swelling with life, and with that growth came temptation, a whisper from his deepest self urging him to break the seal, take the flask, and soak up every last breath of that scent to make his spirit still stronger. Outside the array, Arwen watched Dewey's face tighten and worried. "Grandmother, what's wrong with Dewey?" Galadriel answered gently. "The making of the Philosopher's Stone is itself a trial. He is undergoing a soul transformation. He must resist the greedy cravings in his heart to succeed." "How long will this take?" Arwen asked. "It takes until the black becomes white," Galadriel said. "Only when the substance is fully transformed will this stage be complete." Days passed. The black matter in the flask became ever more white. The jasmine aroma grew richer. Dewey's resistance was tested as the cravings within him strengthened in proportion to his soul's growth. Without Galadriel's constant supply of water element power through Narya, he would have collapsed from exhaustion long before. But she sustained him, and he kept his mind locked with occlumency, wore the crown of wisdom, and sat in deep meditation. Only by those means did he hold back the onslaught of desire that threatened to overwhelm him. On the 21st day, the furnace finally gave a full, intoxicating scent that filled the seven-pointed array. The fragrance was like standing in the midst of a jasmine sea, formless, and yet it permeated to the core of his being. Dewey watched, stunned, as the missing fragment of his soul, taken when he made the Horcrux, mended and was restored. He felt whole again, but the victory came on a knife's edge. The desires that had risen were not external corruptions, not Sauron's subversions, but magnifications of the yearnings that had always lived in his own heart. They worked from within, clawing at his will. He fought them with every taut ounce of discipline, occlumency, the crown of wisdom, and relentless meditation. Only then did his mind remain intact. When the last of the black had finally turned white, the jasmine cut off as abruptly as it had begun. Dewey opened his eyes, reached out, and damped the dragon blood flames with a single gesture. He lifted the double-necked flask with bare hands. Despite the long heat the furnace had held, neither flask nor furnace felt warm. Both were cool to the touch. Inside the bottle, a silver light shimmered. The white powder looked like condensed starlight, and if he leaned close, he could still detect a faint jasmine note. Galadriel smiled. "You have reached the white rose stage, the whitening phase of the Philosopher's Stone. Congratulations, Dewey. The stone is halfway complete." Dewey bowed his head in gratitude. "Thank you, Lady Galadriel. Without you, I could not have completed this stage." Galadriel had indeed been present the whole time, drawing water elements with Narya to steady the process. "And congratulations on your soul," she added. "It has been refined and strengthened." Dewey returned her smile, exhausted but elated. Where his soul had once been diminished, it was now whole and enhanced. If before his inner strength had only just exceeded that of an ordinary man, now it could rival the souls of the Elves, Arwen, and Legolas, whose spirits had been tempered over millennia. In 21 days, aided by the whitening of the Philosopher's Stone, Dewey had purified and elevated his mind and spirit. Arwen's concern returned as she noticed how hollow his eyes were. Dewey, you haven't slept in nearly a month. The work on the stone cannot be rushed. You must rest. Dewey wanted to press on, but Galadriel also joined Arwen's counsel. Narya can keep your body and mind from feeling fatigue, but even the soul will grow weary if you deny it true rest. Listen to Arwen. With Galadriel's gentle authority behind the advice, Dewey yielded. Arwen sang an elven lullaby as they tended him to a couch, and Dewey sank into a deep, dreamless sleep. Before he let his thoughts go, one last thing occupied him, the next phase of the Philosopher's Stone. The coming stage was called the Solar Wheel, the Yellowing. For that, he would need the appearance of Lumbar, Saturn, and the addition of earth elements to turn the white stone into yellow. The source of earth for this would be the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. No outsider needed. According to the astronomical calculations, Lumbar would not appear for 3 months. Dewey drifted into slumber with the knowledge that he had time to prepare for the next step.